To our Audit and Governance meeting, second meeting of the year.
It's third.
Is it?
Sorry, you didn't come to.
Yeah,
you were four of the fifth.
You're not being picky, but
in my defence, the second meeting of this calendar year.
Okay.
He's got an answer for everything.
Welcome one and all. If I introduce, do the introductions, I'm Shell Shah for some of the members who we hadn't met last time. I'm the independent chair of this meeting. And if I go to my left.
I'm Catherine Stevens. I'm interim head of legal at EMCCA and deputy monitoring officer.
I'm Emma Powley. I'm the head of governance at EMCCA.
Michael Edwards, Nottingham City Councillor.
I'm Cecile Wright, Derby City Councillor, and this is my third meeting.
Councillor Neil Atkin, representing Derbyshire County Council, and I'm substituting for Angelique Foster. Thank you.
I'm Richard Bonham, I'm head of the CMAP Audit Partnership.
Martin Shipley, also CMAP.
Nick Bell, Interim Director of Finance and Section 73 Officer here at EMCCA.
I'm Mark Surridge, Forbes Mazars, External Audit Partner.
And Judy Staton, Borough Councillor, Chesterfield. Can I ask people to speak up because I am hard of hearing, and if you don't speak reasonably loudly and clearly I won't hear you. Thank you.
Dave Allen, Derbyshire County Council.
Morning, Kieran Morgan again, Derby City Council.
And Chris Payne, High Peak.
Right. Thank you everyone, and welcome. Any apologies for absence?
We have apologies for absence from Councillor Adele Williams and, as already mentioned, Councillor Foster, who is being substituted by Councillor Atkins.
Chair, I also asked if Graham Chapman be able to turn up as a substitute, but he couldn't make it either, so he sends his apologies.
Thank you. Do any members have any declarations of interest? Thank you. So the next item 4, is the minutes of the previous meeting. Just trying to find.
I have a couple of questions.
Sure. If we can go sort of page by page and then take any items for the accuracy or matters arising as they arise.
Okay.
Yeah. So if on
well, they're more. It's more a comment. It's not an inaccuracy issue.
Yeah. Do you want to carry on then?
Okay. At various points, I think there's a reference to comments made by members of this committee being taken on board or being integrated into, decisions or whatever. I would find it helpful if the comments actually are going to lead to some sort of change or something being implemented. It would be helpful to have all of those noted, because if not, first of all, it's very difficult. Then you've got to come back and see, well, I thought I said that and I can't find it, but maybe it's included in the comments. So that's one of my issues. What else was I going to say? Also, if we're going to demonstrate our effectiveness, it is helpful for us to be very clear about issues where we have said something which has resulted in some sort of a change. So it's a general point. I don't know whether other people disagree with me. I don't know what the convention is for EMCCA's minute taking, but I'm raising it anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Wright.
Yes, Chair. What would also be useful, what as appropriate, would perhaps have on minutes agreed actions, please, so that we get some indication of whether things we suggested and agreed upon have been acted upon.
That was my second point. Thank you.
Great, nice. Thank you.
Councillor Edwards.
Well, I thought we did actually say at the last meeting that one of the things we're going to need is a standing item on the committee's work and committee's progress, and I fully understand why minutes do what minutes do, but that sense of keeping a track of what we've asked, although not very earth-shattering, would warrant its own separate item on the end of every agenda. And I kind of raised that last time, and I thought there was a general agreement for that. Now I don't know if it's in the minutes as such, but it's just the way it works, really. If you're doing audit, you tend to need an item usually at the end of the agenda it says, right, this is what Audit's been doing and this is what we've picked up on and what have you, and that might meet the needs of colleagues that have been raised. So I don't know, Chair, if you can pick that one up, please.
Yeah, no, I can do. Any other observations, thoughts before we go
Just
to
to
the
give you an
detail?
example, I'm looking at 6A, and as I say, it's possible I've misunderstood, but there are other examples. I'm looking at 6A on page 5, and it says that the comments regarding the following financial strategies be taken into account. And then above it says the committee discuss the report and ask questions. Well, I'm left wondering what are these comments that have been taken into account, and I think if they've been taken into account, then they should be logged. It's going to make the minutes longer, but I think it's important for us, our functioning as a committee.
Chair, and finally, when notification is sent out for the meetings and papers, could we ask whether we would like a paper copy of papers to be provided at the meeting, please?
Okay.
And the admin person is notified so that copies can be made available.
Yeah, I can discuss that with the governance
Yes.
team and any practical arrangements.
Yes, thank you.
that we do.
Thank you, Chair.
On the minutes generally, do members feel it's a good idea to have an action action note or
Absolutely.
so that the minutes aren't sort of hugely sort of cumbersome, but then we've got another paper which is the action notes, and then we can follow up on what the actions are.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'd find that helpful in the sense that at least at the end of the year when we're doing our report, we can see this is what we've achieved, this is how we've added value to this organisation. Councillor Payne.
Can I just suggest that you keep a log of the actions through the meeting and then just review them again at the end, and then there's no discrepancy between what we said and what was agreed.
Is that possible to do that, Anna?
Yeah.
Thank you. So moving actually onto the minutes. Anything on page 1? Are both matters arising or for accuracy? Page 2. And finally, there's page 3. And finally, the last page, page 4. Thank you. The next item is our public participation. Have we got any questions from the public?
No, received.
So, item 6 is the first substantial item of this meeting, risk management framework and strategic risk register. Nick, do you want to take us through that?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Can everybody hear me okay?
Thank you, yes.
Thank you. Let me know if there's any problems in relation to that. So this report has 3 attachments contained in it. I'll talk about each one individually, if that's okay. And I'll probably pause as well between each one to take any comments or questions. The first is the risk management framework, which is a document saying how we will do, or the proposed way we will do risk management in the future, and who does what in relation to risk management. It also includes the risk management procedures, which is effectively a guide for practitioners within the organisation about what they should do on a day-to-day basis to support really good risk management. And the third is our very first corporate risk register, which will be refined over time in line with the risk management framework if that is approved, and then also brought back here for regular review on a quarterly basis. So a few words first before I say a bit more detail about the risk management framework, if that is okay. So the first is to say that risk management in the combined authority is still relatively young. We're still a relatively young organisation, about a year old now. And I know from working in other organisations, for instance Cambridge and Peterborough, Combined Authority and others, that it takes a while to embed really good risk management. And the bedrock for that, the starting point, is always to have a good risk management framework. Because if you've got that, you can then build up a good process for effectively managing risk in the future. And why do we manage risk? Well, we do it for 2 reasons really. The first is that if we can foresee something coming up in the distance that might be a big impact on the organisation, put us off track in relation to our strategic objectives, it gives us a chance to be able to get ready for that or to minimise the chance of it happening. That's one good reason. The second is sometimes we can see a risk in the future and actually we think, well, if we do something different, that risk becomes an opportunity. So again, it's about how we look at those risks and can we turn them into opportunities that might help us as an organisation to achieve our outcomes as well. So they're the two main reasons to keep really, really good handle in relation to risk management. And all organisations in the private sector, the public sector and indeed the charitable sector now are really focused around good, strong risk management to enable the organisations to thrive into the future. So I mentioned that the risk register is attached. I'll talk a bit more about that in the future shortly. But again, that's something that will be refined over the course of time. It's a point in time at the moment, and when we come to talk about the detail on it, that will be refined further for its next view by the committee at its June meeting. And I expect actually that risk register will be refined quite significantly over the course of the next 6 to 9 months as we move forward with EMCCA and take on additional responsibilities and develop some of our wider ways of operating. The final thing to say before getting into more detail on the risk management framework is, as I said, it takes a while to really build on that, that foundation around risk management. And one of the things that was really useful I found in the past on that one is that working with Audit and Governance Committee members, each of you comes from a different background. Each of you has a different set of experiences, and actually you can help enormously in terms of helping to identify potentially some risks that we haven't seen, identifying other areas where sort of we think that things are a risk. You may have a different view in terms of how likely it is that to happen. So actually building on that and having an open and frank discussion at these meetings today and in the future when we look at the risk register, I think is incredibly important, and certainly from my experience in other combined authorities, that has helped to refine and get a better quality risk management and risk register than we would otherwise. So I'll just say that as the first overarching comments before then moving on, if that's all right, to briefly touch on, and happy to answer any questions, the risk management framework itself. So that's the first of the 3 attached documents. And the first thing to say is that this is something that it's a living document. It won't be set in stone for a good number of years. It'll be reviewed annually by Audit and Governance Committee with the opportunity to make any changes to this that are required in the future. And it will be approved by our main board as well. The intent with this first iteration of the risk management framework is that following discussions today, we'll make any changes that come out from the committee itself, and then take it to the next meeting of the board, which won't be until after the pre-election period that we're moving into now, and that will be in June for approval by the board at that stage. And then the report, the framework, will come back to Audit and Governance Committee next March for a further review. And we'll be able to see that how it's been working and any changes that you may wish to make in relation to it. In relation to the framework itself, it's meant as well to help to underpin the 4 key values that EMCCA has defined that it wants to work around. So those 4 key values, which are outlined in the report, are about helping to lift our region, about working together to be able to do that, about making a real impact across all of the areas that EMCCA covers, and about being human in the way that we do things as well. So really about the ethical side of things as well as the actual activity through there. And working on those, we've developed something that we call our risk appetite. Why have we developed this? Well, good practice around risk management is that every organisation needs to understand what level of risk it's happy to carry and what level of risk actually is too much for it, and it needs to actively manage through there. And that can vary between organisations, or it can vary within organisations. So let me give you an example of varying between organisations. A tech startup company is going to have a significantly different risk appetite potentially to an organisation that makes passenger airplanes. There'll be different types of risk appetite in relation to those between organisations. Similarly, there's sometimes different risk appetite within organisations of the type of risk you're willing to accept. Another example of that one is that in an organisation, probably its research and development part or its innovative part is going to have a higher risk appetite. They're going to take more risk than maybe its health and safety function, it's going to take less risk through there. So again, within organisations, there's often different appetites as well around there. And defining that appetite is really important, because that helps us to know if a risk is getting too big and we need to do something to bring it back, or if it's a risk that's going to be there, we're just happy to handle it and to manage it. You know, we all know that the world is full of risk, we have to manage risk, we have to live with risk, but if risk gets too big, that's when we need to do other things to bring that risk down. And that's what risk appetite helps us to do. So we've identified risk appetite around 5 different levels. There's different ways of doing this. We've chosen this as being a way that we think is relatively easier for the organisation and partners to understand in terms of the levels. Some of them get exceptionally complicated in terms of risk management. You may think this is complicated, but you know, so this is relatively uncomplicated compared to many risk management frameworks that we have in other areas. So what we've picked there is effectively those 5 levels. You know, from being risk averse, which again is something that, you know, many organisations might look to have. Take that example about health and safety. Through risk minimal, that's where you want to try and minimise as much risk as you can, but you want to carry a little bit. Through measured, that means you want to take some risk if it's beneficial for you as an organisation, to take a bit of risk to get to your objectives, but actually you're not going to take too much. Through being risk open, which is, you know, again, maybe look at some of those tech companies, you know, you want to take more risk because actually, ultimately, you're going to get potentially more benefit, but if things go wrong, it's not going to be too onerous. To being risk hungry, you'll notice that we don't have any of those proposals. That is really for, you know, organisations at the forefront of research and development, who really are not bothered if things go completely wrong, as long as they can actually try and make sure that eventually they get something that works through there. So we've picked those 5 levels, and we've looked at that across 9 key themes that we think are important for us as an organisation. You see under 3.3, within the risk management framework, we've identified each of those, and through a discussion with the senior leadership team, so that is the chief executive, all the exec directors, and the statutory director of finance and the monitoring officer, we've identified our proposed risk appetite for each of those 9 areas. Now, I won't go through each of those individually now, but I'm happy to answer any questions on them, because the key issue is that once they're identified, that for the next year, until we review the risk management framework again, sets the level at which we're going to be really focused about putting in lots of resources and time and effort for anything that's above that risk in those areas to try and bring it down. That's the whole point around doing this. So if you think those risk appetites are wrong, now is absolutely the time to let us know, because we have time to change that now before this gets fully approved in June. If you think they're right, that's absolutely fine. Happy to answer any questions in relation to that. I won't go through each individual one now, but happy to answer any questions as it moves forwards. And then for each risk appetite, what we've also then done is we've reviewed the overall score to understand when things will actually be escalated. So if anything is above that risk appetite, so let's take an example on that one. It's probably easier just to call him now. So if you look at, just bear with me a second. Yeah, 3.3.3, which is on, I'm not sure if the page is there, but it's on page 10 of the Risk Management Framework report. There's a table in there that's got all of the risk themes on and the levels that we're proposing. So let's take that finance one, for instance, where we're saying that we'll take a measured approach to finance. You'll see later on that one of the risks on the risk register is above a score of 13. It's actually a score at 16. We'll talk about that a little bit later when we come to the risk register. What that means is that we need to actively try and manage that risk to get it down. So we need to do something about it. We're not willing to accept that level of risk. There's another finance risk on the risk register that's scored at 12. And what that means is that other finance risk, we're sort of willing to accept it. We'll keep it under check and keep an eye on it. We're not going to do a lot of active work to try and reduce it if it's below that risk appetite. So that's how we use a risk appetite. It's just an example in relation to that for that particular theme through there.
Nick, can I stop you just there? Just if there's any questions on the risk appetite before we...
Yeah, of course you can, yes. I was just about to say one more thing on risk appetite first, but
sorry,
you know,
I'll let you finish on risk appetite and then, you know.
So the final thing I'll say on risk appetite as well is that depending on then the score, the maximum risk score that we get to from that appetite, that will determine how often we review as an executive within the management of EMCCA those individual risks. The higher the risk score, the more regularly we'll review it. The lower the risk score, the less regularly we'll review it. So it's about the use of our resources in the most active and effective way. So I'll pause there, Chair, and then very happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Before Gus and stuff.
The risk appetite and the different levels, they're very general, and I'm into, well, two things. I'm interested in how the people who are involved in defining these, how they decided. I suppose it's about having an example. What I would find easier was if you could give me an example of something in a particular field which was regarded as low risk or measured risk, and why, because otherwise it just seems very, very abstract.
Yeah, so some
examples would be great.
Yeah, absolutely understand that one. So some, I'll give you examples probably through most, if not all of these, from the discussions that we had through there. So let's take that one in relation to finance first, because it's the first one on here, and of course being Director of Finance, it's one I know only too well. So an example of that one is, let's take first of all the Treasury Management, actually, that you considered at the last meeting and made lots of good comments around, which actually I can confirm were including some changes to the Treasury Management strategy and policy from discussions at Audit Governance last time. But with Treasury Management, if we took a very open or hungry approach to that risk, we might say, let's put some of our funding in particularly risky type of investments. So we might say, well, let's put in sort of more bonds, more money market funds that might go down as well as up. Now, we don't want to do that because the risk there is we don't get our money back. We might get a better return, but the main point for us having money is that ultimately it goes to causes we want it to do, which is to help the region, rather than actually risking that we suddenly lose 20% of our money because we put in something that's too risky. So we take a more measured approach to that. If we had a completely risk minimal approach, we'd probably just only ever put our money with the government, which is a debt management office. And that would get us a return, but actually probably not as big a return as we get by taking a more measured approach, which is what we do say, which is we say we'll put some within banks, a bit more risky than the government, but not incredibly risky because we look at the credit rating of them, and we'll put some money with other local authorities as long as the other local authorities are credit worthy.
Yes.
So does that give you a sense in terms of where we're sort of trying to pitch things around, and that's a particular example around
the particular example is one, I don't know whether this has come from the financial sector, but it's much easier for me to understand in finance, because obviously you're looking at what is likely to happen to your investments and what the probability is, etc., etc. Can you give an example from another field that's not finance?
Yes, so let me try and give an example in relation to passenger transport.
Okay.
In relation to passenger transport. So with passenger transport, and particularly we're obviously looking at running buses into the future. There's a transfer that's will be happening, over the course of the next 12 months from the 4 constituent councils into EMCCA around supporting bus routes and concessionary fares, etc. And we'll be trying to design that bus service and things for the future to make sure that's actually in place. If we were to take a completely risk-averse adoption to that, we'd probably just say, well, let's just continue to run exactly the routes that are running at the moment. Because actually, they're up there, they're running, the public knows about them, etc. So let's just leave it at that. It's not going to cost a lot more money. It's a sort of continuation. It's not really going to get to where we want to be, though, in terms of improving things for them. If we were to take the flip side of that, to take a really risk-open and risk-hungry side, we might say, well, yes, we're going to change completely the way that we'll operate the buses. We're going to do more driverless buses, or we're going to do more different things. But actually, it's going to put quite a lot of change on for the public, and the public might not understand that, might not like it, and actually it's not going to work necessarily as well as we would like, because we're landing it too quickly, that change through there. But that's a more risk-hungry one. It's going to cost us more money potentially, but it might have a very significant approach and impact in terms of the public. Or we can take a more measured approach, which says actually what we're going to do is we're going to do some changes to the bus routes, where actually there's good evidence that shows we need to put new bus routes on. We're going to make sure that we're lobbying government and hopefully getting more funding in to be able to run those additional bus routes in those individual areas. We're going to do that in a way that actually brings the public with us, and that people who are using those routes understand, they can get used to the fact there might be different frequencies, there might be different routes that have to come through, there's benefit to them through there. We're not going to throw everything up in the air.
Okay.
Does that give a sense in terms of an operational side of things?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Atkin.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your report so far. I mean, you have been very precise in everything, probably the best informed I've heard in all the audit committees I've been on so far. However, this morning, looking through the body of the report, I'm just wondering how will it work with local authorities. I mean, we organise projects here at the Combined Authority, but when we do a risk assessment, we rely on information coming back from those authorities. And some of those authorities are not very good at feeding back information, so to ensure that we keep on track for the benefit of auditors here, I'm wondering how that will be managed and the capture of information to show accountability going forward in the future. So could you expand a little bit on that?
Absolutely. I think it's a really important point as well, because actually my experience is unless you get good quality information, you can't really manage your performance and you can't manage your risk through there. And of course, you're right, we work with a whole range of different local authorities, not just obviously constituent councils, but all of our colleagues in district and borough councils as well. So you know, we've got 19 local authority partners across the piece, all of whom are important for us to do that with. And what we're developing is through something called our Programme Management Office, or PMO for short. Effectively, they are the ones who are working on both the information flows that we'll need within, so some projects we do ourselves, but you're right, many projects are done by other councils on our behalf. So they're working closely with those councils to understand actually how to get that information in. Some of that's already developed, but some of it still needs to be developed further. So one of the things you will see as well through the next few months will be our approach to performance management. And when we look at performance management as well as risk management, that's the other sort of flip side of it, that's when we need some really, really good quality information coming through from everybody. Now, part of that will be initially, because it's got to be, because we have to have the systems in place, it'll be about written information that comes, or emailed information. What we're looking to do down the course of time, probably over the next 12 months, is to get a better system in place that enables those other councils who are doing things on our behalf to put information in on a real-time basis. And that will help us, but that won't happen overnight. So overnight we'll capture information via email and other mechanisms. It won't be perfect, but it'll be start to get us to where we need to be. And then we'll work on improving that over the course of time. I won't sit here today and say it's perfect. It's not. We need to get better and develop it, but this is a starting point for us.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Edwards and then Councillor McKee.
Chair, that opening remark that everybody does risk management, and yet just how often every day we see people just surprised at what's happened to them, sort of thing. And I think risk management is oversold because actually it often doesn't succeed in actually spotting the problems. But there you are. You have to do it. It's right to do it. And I think the story for me is that risk management often just becomes issue management. If I look at what I'll register at Nottingham, it's a list really of what issues we've got. And if I look at Cambridge and Peterborough, it's a list of things that have gone wrong. And the second half of it is a list of things that have gone wrong already, and they're fixing it. So you've got to do it, but congratulations if you become the first to avoid any surprises and to stop a risk register becoming an issue register. I have to say the concept of appetite is new to me. That doesn't make it wrong. It does say it needs a little bit of training, to which I think it would be interesting to see what you're planning to do to get your staff trained on this. And that would be the one point on that. Certainly the concept of scores not being a multiple of 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 is a bit of a surprise to me. 13 and 17, how did they get in there? So that's all new to me. Not saying it's wrong, just saying this is the kind of stuff that you're introducing as new, and let's get it right and let's learn how to do it better. So I'm okay with that. But really what I think is fundamental to risk management is every service manager, every project manager needs to look at their risk register every month and report any changes. That's the key, I think, to risk management. If you look at Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, it says, things aren't embedded. To get things embedded, visit it monthly, and that would be the one piece of thing I'd stress. I know I misunderstood the report. The report actually talks about when it comes here, yearly and stuff like that. I get all that, so that's fine. If you've got a recommendation on that, that's great. What you need to insist on is your project and service managers all do a monthly check of their risk register and then report any changes. And if that's in your framework, I'd be delighted. I don't know if it is, but thank you, Chair.
Do you want to?
I was going to say, do you want to pick up all the questions and
happy to do either way, Chair.
Councillor McKeon and then Councillor.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chair, and thank you for that. I mean, if this is the starting point and things are only going to get better, this is a great position to be in. It's clear, your pedigree is clear. It's refreshing to see some modern thinking and modern ways of working.
Yep.
Largely my suggestions are going to be operational or for ease of life. One of such is, yes, it's great to see things like target risk in there, or appetite is the phrase we're adopting, which is great. I love that, but is it possible to input it in the actual register? Yeah. So I'm looking at the columns in the register, and I can see, you've got your likelihood and your severity and your risk score in there. But it would be useful to immediately see line by line basis how far away we are from target risk and whether there's an issue to address in there after the mitigations have been applied, of course.
Yeah.
And whilst I'm dictating requests on the register itself, this might be a step too far. I'd also appreciate an indication of velocity. Likelihood is one thing. If something's likely to happen, is it likely to happen within 2 days or 2 years? It would be another useful measure for me to see. So velocity, I think, would be useful, but I of course could live without velocity. Inclusion of the target risk on the register, though, I think would be a huge benefit for everybody. And thank you for that's a great start.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to if you could explain a little bit more about the culture being quite a low risk. And also, I mean, one of the things we want to see with the authority is that we do take some quite high risks at times, particularly in service design and service delivery. I noticed there are 13 and 17 on the register, but if we're going to make any difference, I think at times we need to be a bit quite ambitious in terms of making a difference, otherwise we'll just drift along and nothing will perhaps change. So I'd like to see that being looked at seriously, how we can actually maximise our ability to make changes. And the other thing, Chair, I'll have to move because I'm going to run out of power, so I'm going to sit down there and plug myself in. That's all right. The battery must be failing now. So.
It's on the risk register.
And the risk register, you're not going to have to follow it. Thanks. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Kane.
I'm assuming we're still on the first paper, so I'm going to ask some specific questions about the first paper. So I'm assuming when you're talking about other councils, you're seeing the East Midlands Combined Authority being the commissioning agent and they're the supplier. Because I see supplier mentioned quite a lot. I don't see partner is sort of mentioned, but the relationship seems to be commissioning agent and supplier. Now that sort of makes sense in the reporting sense, but the thing I think is missing in here is partnerships. So the sort of thing we see in the High Peak is for transport, we're very reliant on Manchester and to a lesser extent Cheshire for links to places like Macclesfield. I can see a couple of risks here. The first is you've got two sets of people asking for budget from government or wherever the money's coming from, and they may have differing objectives. So one may get the money, one may not get the money. I don't see any responsibility for the chief executive here described as having that responsibility for ensuring that those objectives are aligned. The political risk that is mentioned is it? There's an acronym, isn't there, that I've seen in here and in the Orange Book. So that's the first thing. And then secondly, once you've established that partnership arrangement, who's actually project managing it, and where does the ownership of the risk lie, or how do you agree the ownership of that risk? So I think there's assuming that you're describing councillors in the commissioning and supplier as suppliers, I think that's within here. But I think the partnership thing's missing. And within that I can see quite a lot of risk, because in the end, how it feels for residents is how successful this combined authority is. And if you see breakdown between, say, Clare and Andy Burnham, or East Midlands and Sheffield, or I apologise, I don't really know what's going on in Nottinghamshire, but I'm assuming it's sort of Peterborough and things like that. That's where it starts to fall apart. That's where you get this sort of conflict. So I'd like to see something against the chief executive for having responsibility for that. And I think that that's a risk that needs to be recognised, because I'm not sure it is anywhere in these papers. And then that brings me to culture. So the cultural risk is actually quite low, but I'd say, taking your point of velocity, because we're recruiting lots of people at the moment, or theoretically recruiting lots of people, the actual cultural risk is quite high right now. It might not be high in the future, but it's high right now and in this minute. And one thing I can see already happening is I see differential in the communication style that is coming out of the East Midlands Combined Authority. So if you're sitting in the PMO, what is the communication style? Even something as basic as which font do we use? Yeah. And I see a lot of projects go off the rail because the project manager is left responsible for delivering the communication, and particularly where you've got joint partnership, if one organisation is communicating one thing and one is communicating another, the people who actually feel the benefit of this combined authority just go, what the hell's going on? And it's quite risky where I live. I mean, I'm in Buxton. If you're up in Glossop, it's very, very risky as to what's actually being communicated, because up there, you're on the edge of Barnsley, you're on the edge of Sheffield, you're on the edge of Manchester. That ability to tell the story becomes really, really important. If you get that right now, I think the risk in the future is probably really, really low. But I think there's a piece of work to be done in the risk register to say, dear PMO, what is your project manager's comms plan? How are they intending to communicate this? Does that fit with joint agreements we have with other people, and does it fit with the corporate style? There's two things. One is, there's an action to look at partnerships, and there's also an action to look at the communication plan and style within culture. And by the way, these are all mistakes that High Peak makes every time I sit on an audit committee. So it's not, it's just, to Councillor Edwards' point, it's normally things you learn along the way.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. Nick, there's a few very useful points.
Yeah.
Sort of, do you want to pick them
Very
up?
happy to try and pick as many of those as I possibly can, and apologies if I miss any, if I've made copious notes. Hopefully I've picked them all, the key issues up, but just to pick up first, in terms of Councillor Edwards, I don't think anybody can guarantee a risk isn't going to happen. I think if anybody said that, they'd be lying. I think what good risk management does, it enables you to be able to hopefully avoid some of the risks. Not necessarily avoid all of them. Some risks just come left field, you can never see them for whatever reason. But this enables you to be able to either avoid them, or if the risk happens, so, but yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, nobody can see everything coming and nobody can avoid all. If we could, we'd be wonderful, I think. And just going back to the appetite scores and those sort of things, there's different ways of doing it. This is one way of doing it. I think it's simply about trying to make sure that, it's an art rather than a science, if that makes sense. So that we're looking at the most important, the biggest things, and maybe not getting too hung up about whether somebody's a score of 17 or 18 or whatever around that. Trying to see, is it something that we need to be actively managing, or is it something that we can live with through there? Councillor Morgan McGeehan as well in relation to the issues. Yeah, absolutely agree. But I think it's important that we have all of the information coming through there. Velocity is quite an interesting one. It's not something that I've particularly come across before or thought about, but I think it's one that we can probably build in relation to that, because you'll see that when we look at the risk register later on, we've got some very long-term risks, like the risk that actually our funding doesn't go up by inflation. That's not going to hit us next year or the year after. In 20 years' time, it's going to be quite significant. And other ones coming in the next 6 to 8 months or 9 months down the track. So I think it's a really good idea. I'll try and make sure that's built in. The other thing to remember, I think, as well, you were saying about the different lines in the risk register. At the moment, the risk register is based on our existing way of doing risk, rather than our proposed way of doing risk. What you're looking at is our proposed way of doing risk. So we sort of taking something that we sort of put together in our initial side of things, where we just start as an organisation. So the risk register itself isn't there yet. We haven't yet got the risk register in the format I would like, to be able to link into exactly what's on the risk management framework. That will happen over the course of the next quarter. When you see that in June, which will be the next iteration of this, you should see it aligns far, far better in relation to that. But it gives a point in time, working our way through there. Councillor Allen. Yeah, sorry, so you threw me there. It's, yeah, it's the design and delivery side of things. It's quite an interesting one, that, because actually, if you were to compare what we're doing here with, let's say, what Cambridge and Peterborough did, which I know has been raised previously, they had design and delivery linked together as a theme, but we sort of felt it was important to split them, because actually in terms of service delivery, going back to the point I raised previously with Councillor Stanton, you don't always, sorry, Councillor Staton, my apologies, you don't always want a significant amount of risk in delivery of services. You know, if it's an important service for the customer, for our communities, like the buses, you don't want it to be enormously risky. You want them to know what's happening. You want them to know the bus is going to turn up on time, hopefully. You know, however many times a day it does. But in terms of service design, actually how we design those services, we're probably more open to different ways of thinking around that, which is why we've got a higher risk appetite around the way we design services rather than the way we deliver. And that's a bit of learning that we took from some, because it came to a beach, we just had that one lumped together through there. And the issue about culture, which I think come back to Councillor Payne's point as well. The reason why that is, the risk appetite for that is minimal, so fairly low at the moment, is exactly the point that you raised, that we're a new organisation. A new organisation, we're bringing on lots of new staff. We're bringing in staff from other organisations as well. So we've already brought on colleagues from the Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire D2N2 LEP. They joined us back in June. The aim, as we move forward in terms of transport and passenger transport, is to bring on board staff from the 4 constituent councils, all of whom have got their own staff at the moment working on concessionary bus routes, on supported bus routes, etc. through there. They will all have different cultures. And the risk is, if we don't have a real focus about getting a single culture for us as an organisation now, those will be all over the place. And actually, to me, this is one that will change potentially over the course of the next year or two. Once we've got that culture in place, the one that we want to have as an organisation, then we might be able to take a slightly different risk appetite in relation to it and say we're happy to take on board, there might be a few changes of culture here or there. But when we're building an organisation from scratch, getting on lots of new people coming in for permanent roles, getting on lots of people coming across from different organisations across the area, we felt as an SLT it's important that we keep a real focus on that one and don't allow too much swerve that away from the core values that we espouse. Those 4 I mentioned earlier on, you know, we lift the region, we work together, being human and making an impact. We feel those are really important, and we want to make sure the culture is built around that one. So does that help in terms of giving you those sense? And just come back, sorry, just Councillor Payne, so that's answering your question around culture. The other issue about comms, absolutely agree. And our comms team at the moment is starting a piece of work looking at how we actually get, you know, sort of house style branding guidelines in place around a whole set of things. So yes, absolutely, it's about how we get consistency of messaging, but consistency of approach as well in relation to that. I mean, I can't answer for our comms team, but I know they have started a piece of work in relation to that, and it will be something they're working hard on over the course of the next few months. Again, that might be something that you want to pick up at some stage down the track. And
it's more specifically that in the responsibilities of the project management office at the very end on page 18, it's their responsibility to ensure that project managers are following that corporate culture and whatever the comms strategy is, and it's not specifically called out here. And it's really important in terms of projects, because if you're not describing your project correctly, people do not know what's happening, and then you find that the project has gone completely off track. That has a huge political risk, because the one thing the public hates is putting money into something and then finding out it cost a lot more than it should have done, because people didn't communicate it and they didn't understand what they were supposed to be doing.
Thank you. And thank you for the clarification there. I agree it's an important point, and I agree we should be, you know, more clear about that in that appendix. Now I'll take that away.
And back to my point that in the responsibilities, the chief executive is responsible for those cross partnership projects that have disparate funding and are not directly being funded by the
Thank you.
by the EMCC.
And if we could just build on that point, which is a final one I was going to come to. I mean, you're right in relation to service delivery, that there is an assumption in relation to a contractor-supplier relationship. That could either be with third-party relationships or with other local authorities living on our behalf. But you'll see if you look down the themes, the last but one theme is called partnerships. And that's meant to pick up some of those wider pieces where actually we're partnering more than having a contractor-supplier relationship through there. So, for instance, again, going back to the point you raised about transferring risk, going back to previous work I did with other combined authority, working through with those partners, particularly public sector partners, where that risk lies, how much is owned by the combined authority, how much is transferred across to the partner, delivering on our behalf, and how much is shared is a critical point, and it took us a long time in the previous combined authority to come to that agreement, but once it did, it paid off dividends. And I think again that's a piece of work that we need to really undertake here to understand exactly how risk is shared across the piece. So I absolutely agree in relation to that, but it's not built in here yet because it's a piece of work that we still need to do.
No, but just going back to my point is it needs to specifically be in the chief executive's responsibilities, so that when we get to performance management, if a partnership arrangement goes off track, we don't see the chief exec going, oh well it was Manchester, or oh well it was Barnsley, or oh well it was someone else. No, the buck stops with the chief exec. And if we have a partnership arrangement that goes wrong because we assess the risk incorrectly, that lies with the chief exec.
Absolutely agree in relation to that. So I will make sure that's included here because I think it's important. But there'll be some further work, as I say, down the track as well to look at actually where risk actually lies in terms of detail. Yes, that's fine.
Thank you, everyone. One of the things I was going to suggest was that we deep dive one of the risks. I was going to suggest that later into one of the risks, and I think that's when the explanation of how risk appetite and the numbers have been arrived and all that, I think would be quite helpful. Because appetite as it is kind of quite nebulous, isn't it? But when you have a real example with a real risk register, if we do a deep dive maybe for a future meeting, then you can actually see how the numbers work and how it comes, how they come together. So. Thank you. Do you want to move on to the next part of your report?
Thank you. Yes. So thank you for the discussion around that. I mean, it's incredibly helpful, and I will make sure, as points were raised earlier, that we've got the action log in place around this one, and B, we have picked up all of those comments that come in there before it goes then to board for approval in June. So the next document is the risk management procedures. And the risk management procedures effectively are a guide, as I say, for colleagues internally and also for partners as well who are working on our behalf around how we will operate risk across the area. It builds on the risk management framework, as you might imagine, through there. As rightly noted by Councillor Morgan McGee, it includes sort of 3 potential risk scores: an inherent risk score, i.e. what happens if you don't do anything, a residual risk score, i.e. what's the risk like now, and a target risk score, what do we want it to be in the future. There is one typo in here, my apologies in relation to it. I didn't pick this up in time, but I will make you aware of it just in case. It will be changed before it goes for final approval, which is right at the bottom of the document, just let me scroll through to it, Appendix 2. If you look at Appendix 2 on page 14 of the document, you'll see there a table that has risk scoring likelihood descriptors, almost certain, through to rare. The first bullet point on rare says there's a history of it happening across the organisation. That should be there's no history of it happening across the organisation. So my apologies, I missed out the word no there. I will make sure that is put in place before it goes to the board for approval. Other than that, I'd welcome any comments or questions in relation to the risk management procedure. I say it should be a document that flows from the framework. It should be helpful for people in the organisation and outside the organisation to know what they need to do to get good risk management through there. So I'll pause there if that's okay, Chair.
Councillor McKee.
Thanks, Chair. Again, great document. Thank you. There's a formatting issue on here. It might just be because I'm a Mac user, but on the box where you've identified hazard, risk and issue, there's a character missing. Just the vertically aligned word tops off the top of the box. I think that's a good description of what's happening there.
Yeah, it's been chopped.
All right,
I'll pick it up as well in the final formatting.
I'm sure you will, and I'll leave that with you. The only thought that I've got for you at this stage is that, in my experience, this is a great document for somebody who's used to the language contained within it and the format that it's presented in, but I've learned that presenting this to an entire organisation, it's going to be difficult to absorb. So I wonder if there is a learning and development resource you could engage with to try and roll something much simpler out, identifying the three levels there of defence, identifying who's in what line of defence and tailor some training to those people. Otherwise, I think you lose them at page 4, I'm afraid.
I try to pick up that comment because I think it's absolutely right. And sorry, I'm not Councillor Evans. I think you raised that point before. I don't think I addressed it, so my apologies in relation to that as well earlier. So on both of those in relation to training and learning and development, yes, you're absolutely spot on. And actually, I'm working already with our learning development coordinator to try and work out actually how to best put this in a bite-size way that enables the wider organisation to understand it. Because people will have different roles and responsibilities depending on their level in the organisation as well. It's good that everybody understands risk, but everyone needs to understand specifically what their job is through there as well. And we hope to get that we'll get that in place by the time this is approved. It won't be approved until June, so guys, we're working on that at the moment. The other thing that we're looking at as well is that the ability to be able to use more e-learning modules that might help in relation to this as well, so people can then just dip in as and when they require it. So both of those, but yes, I think really, really valuable points. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the other observation I want to reiterate, which people mentioned, is we are using a 5x5 matrix normally, and it'd be helpful to have sort of numbers which are sort of kind of consistent, with the risk appetite as well.
Yes.
So we don't end up sort of 17s and 13s. And
I'll pick that up. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, I think that's what he's advocating. It's the opportunity for 17s and 13s.
I think I make out as I had a chat to the Chair. I think there's two separate issues here. There's the issue in relation to risk appetite, which I think is probably fine as we discussed earlier, but there's also there is a diagram in the risk management procedure. Let me just find the one exactly again, which I think there's
3.4.
Yeah, it's the one under 3.4 that has a 5-box model and just literally numbers in from 1 to 25.
Yeah.
And that needs changing actually. That shouldn't be that way. So that is another typo. Sorry, but I should have mentioned that at the start. And I'll change the scores in relation to that. It's literally just picked up every number from 1 to 25 and put it in the boxes, which isn't quite what I intended.
Councillor Atkin.
Been answered. It's been answered.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question about the matrix 1 to 25, because I think I saw something similar in the Orange Book, and I think I've seen something similar in other councils. But regardless of the numbers, if I looked across all the combined authorities in the country, would I find any that have anything in the red? And would that, if they have, would that lead us to review our own risk?
Absolutely you would. In fact, if you looked at Cambridgeshire and Peterborough's, you would find a number in the red. I can mention that because it's an organisation I know relatively well, sort of having worked there until sort of earlier on last year. And you will find quite a few coming through in red there, and a lot of it contextual. So it would depend in terms of where the context is around the organisation. So for instance, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough were moving down the line of looking at bus franchising. Now that was inherently risky, and that was a red risk until it was managed down. Now we are not looking at that at the moment, and therefore that's not a red risk for us potentially around there. So there are a number of red risks you'll find in different areas, but a lot of it is contextual depending on the organisation, what it's doing at the time, and the decisions it's taking.
That's great. That gives me some confidence that you've looked across other authorities, which is what I was after. So thank you for that.
Do you want to move on to... Oh, sorry, Councillor.
Just one quick question. When setting targets, after doing some extensive benchmarking or whatever, do you believe in setting targets at the lower end rather than the high end so that we can make those achievements a lot quicker? How this works, I'm not sure, but some local authorities go for a lower target rather than a very, very strong ambition.
I think in terms of performance management, my own personal view has always been you do something that's stretching and ambitious but achievable. Because the very worst thing to do is set a target that is impossible to achieve. But equally, if you set one that's too easy to achieve, well, you're not really stretching the organisation. So when we look at performance management and setting those targets in the future, my sense is that we'll go for that stretching but achievable approach to it. Because actually, if we didn't, I don't think we'd be serving the people in the best way possible across the region.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Nick. Do you want to move on to the next part of the risk register?
Yeah, thank you. So the last part of the risk register is literally the first cut at, is literally the first cut of that risk register itself. So just in relation to this, the main points I would I draw out is, as we discussed previously, it's in development. It's not yet perfect. It will be improved every time you see it, certainly over the course of the next couple of meetings. Hopefully it'll then get to the point where it's improved sufficiently that it continues at that level through there. It's identified the key corporate risks as far as we're concerned from a senior leadership team perspective. But if you identify anything else, and you may well do, that should be on there, that you think isn't on there, this is an opportunity to be able to put those in now and to include them. As mentioned previously, it includes 2 risks, I will mention those specifically, where the current risk is above our appetite, and we are actively trying to reduce that risk. So the first of those is the first risk you will see there, which is finance. The risk around this, it's going back to Gareth Morgan McGeehan's issue about velocity. It's a long-term risk, but it's a huge risk if it does occur, which is that at the moment we get £38 million from the government every year, 19 million revenue, 90 million pounds capital to be able to invest into the region. That doesn't go up by inflation. That's fixed. So it will be 19 million pounds revenue, 90 million pounds capital in 29 or 30 years' time. Now, even at a relatively benign 2% a year inflation, as we've seen recently, it can be a lot higher than that. That money ends up being worth about, well, less than half of what it's worth now at that stage. The issue is, unless we address that, we're going to find that we're less able to meet the needs of the region moving forwards. And that's a key risk for us. And we're looking to address it by 2 reasons, 2 mechanisms in particular. One is obviously we're in discussion with government all the time through things like the spending review and more generally. And we're not alone in this, we're working with other combined authorities. They're in exactly the same position about saying, well, actually, can we look to potentially find a way to index that money so it links to inflation and goes up with inflation year by year. So that's point 1. The second of which is we're also actively looking at developing what I would call a strategic financing strategy, which will hopefully be developed over the course of the next 6 months, which is looking at how we might draw in other sources of funding that enable us to become more sustainable into the future. So if we do lose relative funding through the investment fund, how can we get other sources of funding? Looking at things like private sector investment, looking at other things like potentially, so how we might utilise some of the funding sources in different ways, how we might utilise some of the assets that will come our way potentially, to be able to actually get that funding in the future. So we're looking to address it by those 2 ways. One is lobbying, effectively, to try and get government to reflect that and change it for us and potentially for other combined authorities. The second is looking at what other funding sources that we can get in the future. So those are 2 ways we're looking to address that. But at the moment, that risk is above our appetite level. So it's one we're actively working to try and reduce in terms of that. The other one is the one that certainly Councillor Payne drew attention to, which is around culture, which is again the fact that we're bringing lots of new people from different organisations, lots of new people coming in, we're replacing lots of the interims, myself included, with lots of good permanent staff now coming in relation to those areas. So again, it's a question about how we make sure that we've got the culture right for those people who are coming in. Again, at the moment, that risk is above where we'd like it to be, simply because there is so much happening in terms of that change. And again, we've got some really active and hopefully effective ways of trying to reduce that risk over the course of the next few months. So those are the 2 in particular I draw your attention to. But very happy to pick up any other points or issues that you would want to be included within that. But cognizant of the fact that the layout of this will change each time and be improved. So I'll just pause there if I could, Chair, and then happy to take questions and comments.
That's fine. One of the things I was going to suggest was that we have a deep dive at our next meeting into, do we think it's a good idea to have this 1 risk or maybe 2 risks, so we can actually run through the whole process, of the risk appetite, the tolerance, target risk, how the risk was arrived, what was decided as SLT and all of that. What do we, and one of the risks I was going to suggest was the highest risk, because that shouts out, to us. What does the committee members think? Do we want to have 1 or 2? Is it manageable to do 2 at the same time, or? And do we think it's a good idea to have the top 2 risks that we have at the moment as for the meeting?
I was struck by people raising culture.
Yes.
So even though that's it, I didn't understand the diagram properly when I first saw it. By it being painted green, it actually says it's something you've got to be more anxious about at a lower score. Which is why I don't think it deserves the colour green. I think the colour scheme for appetites is wrong. But you know, how pedantic am I getting? The basic gist though is that sense of, I think the hint from the meeting was culture was a concern, and that should be one of them. Chair, I don't know if that helps.
Well, we'll just go around the room and then decide which
Yeah,
one.
Chair, I would definitely go for culture and environment. Well, I've stuck in environment here, sorry. I've added, because of the fluidity of having to bring in and recruit in order to build the organisation, definitely.
Councillor Staton.
I was also, like you, I was looking at paragraph 2.7 where it was suggested we look at in more detail at the inflation issue and the culture issue, so that sounds good to me.
Councillor Payne, did you?
I'd say that you'd probably want to review the top 2 at each meeting, even if it's just an update. But I would suggest that each line of this we need to go through now, given the fact that it's going to go to the board in June. And if we've got anything that we need to add to any of these lines, we need to do it now. Otherwise, you know, it'll be gone. Not to go in depth, but I would just check each of these lines before we leave today.
Councillor Limbrick.
Chair, I think I'm supporting your view actually, and I would allow the data to drive the discussion. If we were to look at the top of the 2 where there is the most significant variance between inherent risk and target risk, that ought to be where our attention is directed, in my view, rather than picking out individual risks.
Any more? Sorry, Councillor.
Yes, okay. It's been identified that clearly one of the biggest risks is the finance, and the way that it's cost limited and the impact in a few years' time will have quite a real impact on what we can actually do. So I think the thing we need to do, perhaps not the role of this committee, but there needs to be constant pressure on the government to look at how we're being funded. Otherwise, we will fall at the sort of hurdles in the very near future. That was always one of the problems when the whole organisation was established, that the funding was, as you say, non-inflation. I think we need to press that very, very strongly, and hopefully there might be some change. But I agree with the other points about culture and things need looking at as a continuing assessment and risk. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Atkin.
Thank you. From what I've seen in the report this morning, it's fairly straightforward. And what we've discussed today, we've had a lot of input. So I'm quite happy to put this report forward, but the caveat is that some of us in this room won't be here after the election probably. So I'm just wondering what training will be given to new members when they come in, and will they be updated on what we've just done and covered here today. So that's a question I ask you, Chair.
And of course, by the time it goes to the board in June, the risk register might look different, although we are looking at it today. So, a couple of points. First one, obviously, we'll go through the risk register briefly, line by line. But the 2 risks that looks like to me we're deciding are the highest one, which was the first one. Sorry, I'm trying to scroll down which was the first one of the finance one, the risk of inflation, and on culture, Next, perhaps it might be helpful to have a reference number.
I absolutely will do that, and my apologies to you and to the committee. I should have referenced it anyway. So apologies, it will not be unreferenced the next time you see it. I'll make sure it's done before.
The one with the risk of basically transferring and culture and all that. And I think there's a wider point of culture, isn't it? Culture of partnerships, but also the culture as the organisation evolves from interim to permanent staff. And all of that. So if we have those 2 for the next meeting, and then welcome to the meeting. So do you mind briefly going through each risk, Nick?
Very happy to do that. I'll do it relatively speedily, just so you've got a sense in relation to the risk and the key issues through there. But happy to take any more detail if you would like in relation to them. I will cover the first. We've already covered that around inflation. The other finance risk there is around the fact that we're moving into a government spending review. So none of us know what the finances from the government are going to be, well, probably other than maybe the Chancellor and a few people around the Chancellor, from 26, 27 onwards. And there's at the moment, as well as that funding I talked about, the investment funding, we get lots of other funding that comes in around transport, around economic development, around skills, all of which is unknown at the moment from 2026, 27 onwards. That's a big risk for us again, because if we don't get that funding again, that will mean that we can't deliver the programmes we want to deliver. And effectively what we're doing on that one is we are making the case very strongly to central government that when the Chancellor considers the spending review, that actually these things are built into the future and that funding continues. If it doesn't, on various areas, we're also planning to see what the alternatives may be. I can't give you detail around that yet. That planning has just started. Obviously, it's not something that's going to impact on us for a year, because it will be for 26, 27. We know the 25, 26 funding already, so the one that starts in April. But it is nonetheless a risk that we are aware of and are actually trying to reduce through there as well. So that's that one. Do you want me to pause up for each one, Chair, just to see if there's any points?
Yes, please. Sorry, Councillor McKeon and then Councillor.
Thank you. I'm likely to become a nuisance here, I'm afraid. So on the finance, it's good to see two risks, but they both appear focused on income. Do we have a separate risk registered about expense, managing costs, potential for overspend as we expand? We get digital, physical assets, and people are quite quick to spend money.
Yeah. So if I could just explain again, this is obviously the corporate risk register. This doesn't include every single risk that we've got within the organisation.
Oh, I agree.
You have about,
I would also argue that's a corporate level risk.
That's through there.
Controlling spend.
Well, to a degree, but the organisation at the moment, the vast majority of our budgets are not demand-led.
Right.
So it's different to maybe an organisation in the local authority sector where you've got significant demand-led budgets that are more difficult to control. The vast majority of our budgets at the moment, until we move into future years, are either around commissioning, so we're giving money out for a GFA, grant funding agreement, for someone else to deliver on our behalf. We're not delivering ourselves, and therefore that's constrained. The money is what the money is through there. Or it's around staffing, to ensure that we've got the right people in to deliver all the things we want to do. So that's where we are at the moment. Now, within that situation, the risk of overspend is considered relatively low, because actually you're not looking at demand-level budgets there. As we take on new responsibilities, particularly around passenger transport, from next October onwards, then I would expect that risk to potentially come onto the corporate risk register. Because actually it's one that we then need to start thinking more about, is there a particular issue? So that's again describing hopefully the context of the organisation. So I think at the moment, I would argue the context is that we don't necessarily need to have, it says it's a risk, don't get me wrong.
A longer range risk.
But it's a risk that lies below the corporate risk register at the moment. It probably comes onto the corporate risk register when we take on more demand-led budgets like passenger transport.
Yeah, thank you.
And just an observation, so I agree, another way of getting money in is to be constantly having your radar on other sources of government funding. But one of the risks that then emerged in High Peak was we were bidding for the money, getting the money, but forgetting to include in our bid the project management, which sort of comes into people. So it's great to have the money sometimes, but if you haven't got anybody to manage the money, you end up in a little bit, not in a chaotic state, but you end up having to trade resources to, fund, to support the funding, and something else has to suffer a bit. So I don't know if there's a comment needs to be in there or linked to the people bit about you get the money in, but you need to make sure that you cover the costs of the money.
Yeah, but I think it's a really good point, and actually it segues wonderfully through to the next risk, which is the people one. And this one is very much around our ability to be able to recruit and ultimately retain the right quality of people as well. Now, if we've gone back 6 months, this might be a slightly higher risk because we weren't sure how the market would respond to some of the permanent recruitment that we've done more recently. The good thing is that at both very senior levels, so the Chief Exec we've got now permanent, we've now got 3 new members of the senior leadership team who are coming on a permanent basis. and we've got also significant new permanent staff starting through our wider recruitment campaigns. So because of that, we feel now the risk is manageable and below the risk appetite level. It's not one we're going to completely ignore, because we might find in the future, particularly in certain key areas where it's difficult to get people and the market is difficult, that we still can't get the right quality of people in. But at the moment we feel relatively more comfortable that risk is manageable and being managed effectively through there. As has been said here, that if we do need to manage that in the future, we'll also look at potentially use the interim market again. I mean, the aim at the moment is to remove the interims by getting permanent people in place. But you've always got an opportunity if you suddenly find it difficult to be able to recruit for a period of time through there. So we think this risk is below radar, below appetite, manageable, but still needs to be on there because it's one that we need to keep a focus around. Does that help?
Do you want to move on to the next people partnership?
Yep, thank you. It's yes, this one's around something that isn't necessarily there yet, but it's just one that we're acutely aware of. And I mean, I guess it comes around, you know, sort of both partner organisations. As I say, the interims are being replaced, could release a potential gap in terms of knowledge, corporate knowledge that we've developed over the last year. We're dealing with that particular side of it by making sure there is good transfer of that knowledge, written records, etc. through there, accessibility coming into those areas. But it also reflects potentially in partner organisations. I think it was mentioned obviously that, you know, sort of we don't have everybody around this table after May. Again, that might create some risk for us as an organisation if there are significant changes that come up as part of that. It's just something for us, we can't do anything about changing it, but it's something for us to be aware of and to manage that through there as well if that occurs. So that's what that particular risk is about. It's a combination of those two.
Thank you. I mean, Councillor Atkin did mention about training earlier, and obviously if we may have a new different cohort of members, it may be useful for us for this meeting as well to have some kind of training. And again, all of these things could be picked up again in terms of our framework and policies and strategies as well. Service design?
Yes, service design. The first of these is very much around the transport area and the change that we're making to transport, some of which are known and some of which we still need to define. So we know that we're taking on responsibilities for public transport, as I mentioned, from later on next year. We haven't yet decided whether or not that could or should include asset transfer as part of that. So things like bus stations, etc., bus shelters, and ultimately from 2035, potentially even the tram, I think are all still to be discussed and to work through in relation to EMCCA's responsibility in relation to those. And actually this is another issue about velocity. We found Councillor Bowman Games actually velocity is quite useful because actually velocity, if we look at say the tram, you know, we're sort of 10 years out or so from that potentially thinking about that transferring in if it does. But actually the closer we get to that, the more we're going to have to do in terms of managing that change if that does come into the combined authority, and therefore that risk may well go up and we'll put more focus and effort into it at that particular time. So that's what this one's about. It's the fact that actually there's quite a lot of change potentially around assets. Assets are always complicated because they normally come with liabilities, and therefore we need to do a lot of thinking and work on that one if we decide to transfer assets in to the combined authority.
Chair.
Thank you. Councillor.
Yeah, no, this is one that, as a policy concern, causes me significant concern. Nottingham City Council has a reputation. We have the big wheel. We've had years of pioneering work. Arguably we're the best. And the idea, therefore, that there's concepts being talked about, like, oh, shall we do something about the ownership of the bus shelters? Possibly doesn't even understand that the bus shelters in Nottingham are actually owned by a separate organisation. There is a lot to know and a lot to learn, and when people then talk about uniformity across the combined authority, that's the moment, oh, hang on a minute, you try and impose Nottingham's solution on everybody else. First of all, there's a long way to go, and secondly, you're just different. So I think there's all kinds of red flags go up here in my mind, full stop, that people are even thinking about this kind of stuff. But okay, talk it through. But it gets worse. I think there's just confusion at the moment about who's taking what when on the tram, and it's quite worrying. Some of the news on the tram, the 3 options they picked, for instance, are not options that I would have picked. You know, who's pushing for Toten, for heaven's sake? Gedling, the one that will make an actual difference is the A52 Park and Ride, which is the one that would actually impact on air quality, stuff like that. So there's real signs here of confusion and muddle. Maybe therefore it's right to be raised as a risk. But if the risk is turned in terms of, because what we've got to have is uniformity, well, watch out for that. Because I think uniformity could be just a big mistake. With just too many bits, too many differences and too many histories. That's really the point, really. Whether that changes your risk register, I don't know. I'll leave that alone for the moment. But the gist of it is, be very careful about mucking this up, because we are so good. We had to take on the tram for the county side of it. You know, the county wouldn't touch it. So all of that history is there. Yes, by all means, have it on a risk register, but be careful about stating the aims in terms of things that in themselves are inherently wrong.
If I may, I think that's why I carefully use the word if. Because I don't think any decision has been taken yet, whatever in relation to it, but it is flagging that up, that actually if a decision is taken, it could cause significant risk around those areas, and therefore we need to go into it carefully in a managed way to understand those nuances, to understand what's required at local level and where differences should occur.
Can I just make a slightly separate point about the concept? Well, I think one of the fundamental problems with risk management is their presentations in fonts or type sizes that you can't blooming read.
I'm sorry.
Now, but everyone does it, right? They say, oh, well, you have to have a grid so you can ensure that each grid is filled in, right? And then you've got, well, you get, how many you get? You get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 boxes per line. Look at that. 4 of them contain either one line or one character. And therefore, you get presentations that you can't read unless you print on A3. And when will someone learn that what you need to do is catalogue the information in one format, present in another? Because the first 3 columns could be combined, and the second 4 columns could be combined, and you could do it in a way that's readable or legible. And I think that's one of the fundamentals that I taught on risk framework. But I thought I'd leave it for a while. But I mean, just that sense of it can't be read.
I take the point, and I'll stick my hand up and say I'm guilty on this one because I'm the one who actually did those column sizes. So it's but I'll learn. Thank you. Okay. It's about learning environment, and I'll make sure in the future that hopefully it's done in a better way that actually gives a bit more.
I have got examples of stuff that I can send you that shows how to reformat it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Councillor McKean.
Thanks, Chair. Forgive me, I'm slightly off point. It took my brain a minute to catch up, but back on the people risk, and this is an operational matter for this committee, there was an intent to recruit independent members. That's one of the ways you would mitigate the risk of all-out elections and loss of committee members. But is there an update on the position of independent members?
I haven't got an update at the moment, but what I can do is I can try and get Jody to update us and maybe email members around. Unless you have an
I don't, unfortunately. I mean, I know the intent is there. I just don't know exactly where, because it's a monitoring officer's responsibility. I just don't know exactly where Jody's got with it. I think he can probably email people around.
Okay, yeah. It's not a matter for the register. I would appreciate an update at some point on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor.
Thank you. Talking about as an example of the Nottingham tram, this is quite a big project in infrastructure terms, and they are talking about expanding that service. And when it comes to allocating infrastructure funds to this project, there is a danger to this authority, to the combined authority, that the bulk of that funding may go to the tram network rather than fairer funding around the other authorities. We need to ensure that there's a fair balance of funding elsewhere, and I'm not quite sure how that will be tracked, whether the infrastructure funding will be better spread and not all concentrated in one area as an example. So is that achievable as a target to make sure that balanced funding across the whole region?
I think it comes back to it's obviously a policy issue, a policy decision, rather than necessarily one in terms of managing risk through there. But certainly, I think if you looked at the way that the current infrastructure grant, the big one for the City Region Sustainable Transport Scheme, the £55 million worth of capital that we've got for that for next year has been distributed. And that's a combination of working on some really strategically important schemes across the area, together with making sure that that there is sufficient funding to be able to have an impact on pretty much all parts of the region. So it's getting that balance right, I think, between making sure we've got strategically important funding in place, and also making sure that actually what we're doing has got an impact for everybody as much as possible. And it's a fine balance to get, but I think hopefully that's the intent in the future. I obviously wouldn't want to constrain policymakers, the board and the mayor within EMCCA, but that's my sense of where they've been to date and where I think they would want to be in the future.
Thank you. Chair, I need to come in because first of all, I am a member of the Tram Development Board. I don't think we're making decisions here that are significant, but I do think it's important to tell people. I'm also a member of the Railway Pension Company, to which I would just point out there's no reference to railways in this category either. And because no one's going to talk about railway ownership transfer in this, because it's way too big. But that final point is actually why people in Nottingham were so concerned about a combined authority. Someone then said, but it's got to be even when we're actually a regional capital. We've got to get some stuff done to boost the profile and boost the impact of the regional capital. It is one of the reasons why we're concerned about a combined authority. Is that thing that says we'll just even it all out. We've got big things to do.
Yeah. And if I may, Councillor Edwards, it's that balance between the big things, the strategically important things, and having that impact through there. And it'll be people far wiser than myself who make those decisions in the future.
As I was reminded, these are policy issues, not audit issues. So.
Thank you, Nick. Do you want to move on to the last few?
Yes, thank you. So then moving on through the service designs, we've got the next one, which is about when we're designing services, we obviously need input from the public. It's important that they input in terms of actually how services are going to operate in the future. This risk is very much around the fact that a lot of the public still don't really understand what EMCCA is, what we're about, what we're doing, and therefore trying to make sure that they do understand that and they get a sense in terms of the impact that we can have, so they therefore do engage in relation to consultation and design issues is we think important through there. So again, that's why it's raised up here as a risk. It links back to some of the communications we talked about previously, and making sure that actually people understand, hopefully, and getting a better understanding generally over the course of the next year or so in terms of what we do as an organisation.
Okay.
Thank you.
And just on that point, so I think that's well made. And the point I made earlier about the PMO being responsible for ensuring that there is a decent communications plan, I think it's engagement stroke communications. Engagement should be within communications, but I think it needs calling out based on that very specifically. Yeah.
Engagement consultations.
Yeah, too many project management offices generally. I come from a telecommunications industry background, and too many PMOs end up throwing the project manager under the bus when it all goes wrong, when actually they had a responsibility to check that the project was a good project to start with. So I think that point about engagement is well made.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next one was more on service delivery, which is the fact again that as a strategic authority, we're rightly focusing on some of the strategic issues, but some strategic issues take a long time potentially to deliver. So it's a question about how we get that balance right between impact and delivery that's visible and the big strategic issues that might take quite a long time for us to deliver and develop through there. And if we get that wrong, if we do too much tactically, it comes back to the point that Councillor Edwards raised, we're not dealing with the big issues. If we just wait for 4 or 5 or 6 years and don't do anything because we're waiting for the big strategic stuff to come along, but people will quite rightly say that actually we're not delivering as an organisation. So it's how we get that balance right between the two through there. So what we're trying to do is to make sure that we've got sufficient, at the moment, sort of areas that we can get more immediate impact in relation to. So you'll have seen maybe at the board At his last meeting, they've agreed funding now for 6 business cases, about £14 million worth of funding going in to 6 really important areas and issues across the region to get that working. So it's about how we deal with that, how we make sure that that funding gets in and has an impact, at the same time as reserving enough funding for the really, really, really big stuff down the track that would take quite a while for us to deliver or be in the position where we can put funding in. So if that helps to understand that particular risk, that's what it's focused around.
Yeah. Thank you. What's the next one after that? We've had service delivery.
Yeah, the other service delivery one just on the bottom there is obviously, as you might imagine at the moment, you know, we are doing that transfer of operational responsibility around supported bus transport, so support bus contracts and concessionary fares, and that's simply about managing the risk effectively as that transfers across. It's inherently risky, so we're just keeping an eye on it, but we've got really good progress in terms of keeping it under control. Compliance and regulation. We think that the compliance and regulation, the one that we really want to keep an eye on is that one around Equalities Act and making sure that we've got a really good focus on that one, both externally in terms of the communities that we serve and we deliver to, and internally in relation to our staff as well. Because otherwise we could be in that particular position where we don't want to be, that we get adverse publicity, potentially even a legal challenge coming up. We haven't had that so far, but again, that's something that we need to make sure that we don't have in play. And we're building that in as part of the work that we're doing more generally as part of our single assurance framework development as well, that Jody can certainly talk about. I know we talked about previously, could talk about again in the future in relation to that. As to make sure, and obviously that covers all compliance, but we flagged one up as a particular issue, just to make sure that it's one that, you know, we were keeping an eye on in relation to the organisation.
Yeah, thank you for raising that. Yeah, I just wanted a sense, and you may have expressed it, of what is being done proactively to ensure that we are ensuring that we're complying with the relevant legislation around equality.
So it's so our head of legal there, Catherine, can talk about a lot of the sort of legal work that we're doing as well. But effectively, as an organisation, we're doing quite a bit of work in terms of a culture, to understand that people understand the importance around those individual areas, understand the importance of undertaking qualities impact assessments, and actually the real benefit of that. Going back to some of the points that have been raised previously about performance management, you know, we'll be in the process of setting metrics around those individual areas as well for our longer term outward impact around those areas, our communities that we serve, as well as internally as an organisation, to make sure that we have those right through there. But I would say that, you know, sort of we are by no means experts in relation to this, and we are always willing to listen to others who know, you know, sort of a bit experienced, better ways of doing this space. And I think if I was here, and there is no one here unfortunately from HR, I think they would also say they're taking external advice, but I'm not sure who the external advice is from, unless colleagues know, so apologies on that one. I don't have that figure to my...
I'll bring Councillor McKeon and pick up anything else.
Thanks, Chair. I'm curious about the rationale for calling out that specific regulation, particularly the rationale about the risk of legal challenge, because I think there's possibly other regulations that we're more exposed to, and this one's a risk grade 8. So I'm curious about why that specific risk, and also wonder whether it's better called out as a people risk rather than a regulatory risk. I understand it is a regulation, but it's operational, it's a people risk, and they would be the people exercising the mitigations against the risk. And just one more formatting matter, if you don't mind. If a table spans multiple pages, perhaps we could repeat the headings just on the... Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I will learn my formatting from this meeting, I promise.
I don't mean to criticise.
No, but it seems it's taken well, so it's because again, I won't claim to be the best in the world in terms of utilisation.
I think it's quite striking that Cambridgeshire and Peterborough also pick out equalities legislation as a risk to really manage, and they kicked it off marking it as a red risk. So it's quite interesting that you started agreeing. I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm just saying it's quite striking that another authority, that one authority that happened to look at, actually had equalities legislation picked out. So I think picking it out in the way you've done is quite justified and quite important for reasons I don't fully understand, but I can get it. There's something here to trip over if you don't get it right, and it deserves the separate attention, I think.
Thank you. And if we just pick up on that wider point about why it's here rather than anywhere else, I mean, obviously, one of the big issues that we have to deal with, and will be dealing with over the course of the next year in particular, as I mentioned, is around passenger transport. It's only one of the areas, but actually that in itself raised a huge set of issues in relation to potentially equalities legislation. Around ensuring that your people have access and fair access around those individual routes. So therefore, that alone, and that was a reason as well actually why it's picked out of Cambridge and Peterborough, I happen to know, in relation to some of the areas around that, as a particular one in relation to compliance. And that's why it's a compliance regulation issue risk rather than anything else at the moment. There is, I think, a people risk in relation to wider equalities that sits within the people risk register, but that isn't flagged as high as this one, because this one's very much around that change that we're going to see in terms of responsibility, and that does become an issue potentially around compliance and regulation and achievement of the responsibilities of the Equalities Act.
So the service delivery elements of compliance with that Act, and that's a current pressing matter. I understand. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We've talked about the next one, which is... oh, no, sorry, we haven't said that at all. No, we have talked about the next one, which is the culture one. Yes, so, and then the second culture one is simply coming back to the point that's been raised, you know, very regularly, and I think very adequately, you know, more than adequately across this and across this committee, which is actually, it's all very well having all these risk management papers in front of us today. How are we going to make sure it happens in practice? So a lot of training to be done in relation to that to make it actually happen through there, because otherwise there's not a lot of point to it if people aren't actually following what they need to do and have got the culture right.
Just one observation in the commentary where it says the PMO will have the authority to expedite actions and ensure that all mitigations are carried out efficiently and effectively. I think it needs a sort of caveat about responsible escalation, because if it becomes a political issue where you have a partnership between two combined authorities, you don't want to give someone power that is beyond their authority, and the way it's written at the moment, it gives them power that's beyond their authority.
Point taken, thank you. It's probably just slightly loose language.
Just a caveat or something, that's
all. Yeah, no, thank you. It's a good point. As I say, this is where this actually, you know, so all these comments that are coming in from members, which are incredibly useful. It's helping us to get a better approach, so thank you all for that. Data management information. Cyber security is a big one here. I haven't put anything in relation to the steps we're taking to address that. The best practice is not to do that in a public document. But all I will say today is we are taking significant steps around those, but I won't tell you what they are.
Partnerships, we talked about partnerships.
Yeah, we talked about partnerships before in terms of that. That's particularly, I think, that this particular partnership one around the understanding and the engagement with the Inclusive Growth Commission. Obviously, that's a big thing that we're doing at the moment to set all the key objectives in the future. We need to make sure, particularly on this one, this is a high-level risk of partnerships, that all our partners really understand that, are engaged in it and have their say and their views are reflected in it. And then finally, in terms of programmes and projects, there's that risk in terms of overcommitment. You know, sort of, we're still a small organisation, still a young organisation. We try to do lots of things, go back to the point around capacity, and we just need to make sure that we don't take on too much. And the stuff we have said we're going to do, we deliver well. That's probably it, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. It's very, very comprehensive, you know, explanations of the risk management strategies and things. Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, I had been concerned that we'd do a risk register and not refer to other places, and because Cambridgeshire and Peterborough was the authority that was used to sell to Nottingham the idea that we should do CCA, I went and checked their risk register, and then I found you practically wrote it. So the irony of that. I think what's striking therefore is whether an exercise, perhaps Cheryl, you could lead it with some colleagues, about checking the registers of one or two others and seeing whether there's other things to learn. I mean, I've done a very quick analysis of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, which I'll share some bits with you next. But the thing that nags me is Tees Valley. Tees Valley, it seems to me, is the combined authority that has all the signs of something being not right in the way things have been done. And I don't know if it's a risk matter or a standards or in public policy matter. And of course, as such, the allegations are not proved either. But we're into this game as well of exploring tax-free zones and stuff like that. So I would seek advice from the officer on whether that sense of things going wrong in terms of people having interests or gaining unduly personally these projects is a risk that needs to be tackled. Maybe you'd have an answer in a future time, but I'd ask you to consider adding something on now. In reviewing the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough analysis, I was quite struck at how a number of the risks are not risks at all. They're the things that went wrong. So they're the ones that got added at the bottom. I'll read some of those in a minute. But what was quite interesting was that climate change was risk number 5. Now, we haven't got climate change, and I don't know, again, if this is because it's a policy area rather than a risk area, but I'd be interested if you'd reflect outside of this meeting on whether you think climate change deserved to be in. I might, with Cambridge being involved, expected something to be there about university expansion, and the only reason I mention that is because Nottingham's now got 2 leading universities and Derby's got a university, and there's that sense of that sector's in trouble at the moment. So the question I would ask is it worth the addition of a risk analysis on the impact of what's happening in universities to the combined authority? It's a question I pose rather than demanding an answer now. I think the procedural risk with a combined authority, if I can draw on a story that happened when the metropolitan authorities were created, now which one would be West Yorkshire. When they combined authorities, the job of checking football stadiums got dropped and it got missed. So they didn't get inspected, and Bradford City's Valley Parade, built up this pile of rubbish underneath the stand, which then set a fire. Now, I'm not trying to say, oh, we're going to have a fire or anything like that. I am saying, has the authority done a procedure whereby all the ideas that it existed amongst its constituent authorities have been compiled into a new register, even if they then decide it wasn't worth doing? I mean, what's in my mind at the moment is that South Notts, in fact Nottinghamshire were driving the idea of a faster train line in from Radcliffe and Bingham and beyond. The Midland Connect were driving a rail project for faster rail in from Lincoln and Newark in particular. What's happened to those projects now? It's not being looked after by the combined committee of the county and the city. Are they being dropped? And then new ideas like a railway station at Lenton. Have all those ideas that were in the ether at city and county level, and they're now in the domain of the combined authority. Has a list been done to make sure, are we sure that we've got all the things that there are to be checked? I've mentioned this worry I have about imposing uniformity. I think you might want to celebrate variety, but the other one I'm worried about, if we talk about climate change, what's not in the Cambridge and Peterborough list, or yours, is air quality. And I think that's developing as a health issue in Nottingham, for which we need more to be done about big transport changes to actually relieve the air quality problems that are developing. So there's a list of points there. I think to ask you to reply to them all would be ridiculous. I think what I'd be liking is appreciate is an assurance that you'll go away and have a look at them and say, Councillor Edwards, yeah, that's interesting, and Councillor, no, that's probably not worth, whatever your opinion is, but or the organisation's opinion is, but if you nevertheless could work through the list, it would be appreciated.
If I can pick on about, I absolutely will, Councillor Edwards. The only one I will come back on, just to say, because it's something that you'll probably see coming up, I think, in your June meeting, is in relation to Tees Valley. We already have, and we rely on Derbyshire County Council's anti-fraud and anti-bribery policy and strategy, and we'll be developing our own on that one, and that should be hopefully coming, I think, to your June meeting in terms of forward planning. So I just want to mention that, because that was a specific issue you raised in relation to Tees Valley through there.
Thank you, Chair. And actually, I should pass on Councillor Graham Chapman, who attended the first meeting of the Authority, the one you missed, Chair. Have we mentioned that? He made a big point about saying that there was this obligation on staff to report issues, and you actually took that on board and applied it to the policies of the authority. So thank you for picking up on that. I know Councillor Chapman's aside hasn't been since, but he was grateful that action was taken, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Wright.
Yes, thank you, Chair. What's missing here from the Cambridge and Peterborough context, and also our context, is anything or any recognition with respect to socio-economic impact? As you are aware that our conurbations within the region, there are areas, Nottingham and Derby where I am, where there is considerable deprivation. In the ward I represent in Derby, I should say Hyson Green in Nottingham, over 50% of the children, and Meadows, over 50% of the children and adults are in poverty. And I understood that part of the principle, rationale, vision, aim, objective of the authority was to tackle poverty, deprivation in terms of skills, because I know as a region that where skills and education were relatively low, job opportunities into jobs, etc., etc. But I don't see anything here in looking at governance and skills where we overtly measure, look at the extent to which we are having any impact or wanting to have impact in terms of those really, some would say in some instances, very, very deep-seated structural challenges.
I think it's a really, really important point. Thank you, Councillor Wright, for that one. I think the key thing is obviously at the moment we're trying to work out our inclusive growth, aims and objectives, and inclusive growth is absolutely, I think, what you described there in terms of actually how we deal with and help all of our communities, particularly those who need more help than others coming through, so that whatever we do impacts on everybody, and helps to get rid of some of those long-standing issues of inequality that impact on those areas. And how that then translates into the risk register, I think is going to be probably the next iteration, if that makes sense, because I think we probably need to get the inclusive growth objectives first. I'm sure that they will incorporate that, and then look in terms of each of those objectives, what's the risk that we don't deliver that? Because the other thing, of course, is that will be something that the skills and employment committee will be looking at very close themselves as well over the course of the next few months. So absolutely pick that up, and absolutely I would expect the next iteration of it, the next one iteration of the risk register, to have those strongly in place, because we don't yet know exactly what the inclusive growth outcomes are going to be coming from the Inclusive Growth Commission. We haven't yet got them through, but I do pick that point up very strongly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. So we have 2 recommendations for the report. The first one was to review and comment the framework, the procedures, and recommend them for approval to the EMCCA board. Are we all in favour of doing that? Subject to the comments and observations that we've made. And the second one was to note and discuss the strategic risks, which we've also done. So,
yeah, I mean, this is the problem with these recommendations. Sorry, Charles, I should indicate properly. That obviously review and comment is the advice to us, and then we are then supposed to say what it is that we've done, isn't it? And I think somebody earlier made a point about what we should go through at the end, what we've all agreed. I think it's tricky to write that out here and now. I think that's very difficult. But yes, Chair, in your opinion, what is your process for checking how what's been raised will be discussed? I'm slightly worried about writing reports to do that. I'm wondering if there's just an onus on you, Chair, to re-review what's been said, perhaps even watch the video again, and see just what it is you think you want to pick up, or what you think you've been asked to pick up, and has got the consensus of the meeting.
So it's what I was planning to do was after the meeting speak to Nick, Emma and Catherine, sort of go through either the video footage, and so we make sure that we pick up sort of the points that are raised, and then some of them will obviously translate into either minutes or the actions, you know, for few meetings. If members are happy with that.
But the recommendation is actually to ask the chair to review all the comments made and to ensure progress on all the pertinent points.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that in conjunction with the officers.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you, Nick. Really appreciate, you know, it's a really important document. I know we spent a long time on it, but really appreciate all the effort and all the other officers of, you know, effort in getting this risk register and the policies off the ground, especially being the first one, you know. Can I suggest we have a quick 5-minute comfort break and then we reconvene for the last item? Next item on the agenda is item 7, which is the internal audit plan for next year. Nick, Richard, you want to go?
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps if I pass over to my colleagues here from Central Midlands Audit Partnership, I think that the committee has heard far too much from me today, and will benefit from hearing from Richard and his colleague Martin here.
Can I just ask a question before we start this audit partnership? Because I'm just reading the opening remarks that they represent Derbyshire authorities. Will they be doing Nottinghamshire as well after today? Or is it just a central entity?
No, the Nottinghamshire councils will probably make their own decisions about their internal audit service.
That's all I needed to know, yeah. Thank you.
If I could just add to that, we do one council in Nottinghamshire, which is Ashfield. Ashfield are one of the partners.
Yeah.
Richard.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to talk, I mean, clearly, as Nick has said, we're the Central Midlands Audit Partnership. Just a bit of a background, because one of the parts of the report says, you know, that EMCCA is applied to join the partnership. It's gone to the partnership board, and the partnership board has accepted that. So, CMAP from the 1st of April will have 9 partners. Adding on to the ones that Nick has identified in there, there's also North Warwickshire are also joining on the 1st of April with EMCCA. So we had 7 before that date, so we're now up to 9. Most are local authority. We have got Derby City Council's Elmo, which is Derby Homes, and we've also got Derbyshire Fire and Rescue Authority as well as a partner. We've been in existence since 2012 when it was a partnership started between Derby City and South Derbyshire District Council. So that's how it came into being, and since then we've had quite a few others want to join. We are getting bigger. It does have its problems because we need to resource all these things. It's not too bad when you've got authorities joining that have got audit staff in place. When you've got new authorities joining, the advantage to us of EMCCA is it's a nice challenge. It's a new authority. I mean, we've spoken about this already in the previous one, and this is really, I'm going into the progress report now, because although we call it the audit progress on the audit report, it's more consultancy, because a lot of the work we're doing at the moment is working with officers at EMCCA around, you know, have you considered this? Have you considered that? We're looking at the key elements. So we've looked at governance. We're still looking at governance. We've looked at risk management, and some things being fed back on risk management. We're looking at the financial management as well. We come across a few problems with trying to do our work, and the IT audit is a fine example of this one, because, you know, what do we look at IT-wise? The financial management system at the moment EMCCA are using is Derbyshire County Council. A lot of the other systems are Nottinghamshire County Council. So the main point for us there is, you know, if we're going to get assurance on how these things are working, it's talking to the constituent authorities that are providing all of this. So, you know, we'll want to find out, you know, I mean, we've been made aware by EMCCA that, you know, Nottinghamshire County Council has the various, you know, all the rest things in place for cyber security and that type of stuff, PSN, that type of thing. But we need to make sure, you know, are the certificates in place? That gives us assurance, that gives us a tick in the box. The real challenge for me, and I'm sure our friends at External Audit will be looking at me on this one, is how do I put the opinion together that I should be bringing to the, well, someone will be bringing to the June meeting. The thing is, it's all going to be around the consultancy work, but Chair, as you know, having been a head of audit, you can gain assurance from what you're looking at as well. Just doing consultancy work gives you the assurance that, you know, EMCCA are moving in the right direction with everything. Sitting in on this meeting this morning and the debate around risk management gives me assurance as well that, you know, it's been properly looked at. We've looked at risk management, we'll continue to look at risk management. The advantage we've got at CMAP is we have a former insurance and risk manager that does all our risk management audits, so he's got qualifications in risk management. He's seen risk management in various organisations, and, you know, he can compare and contrast. So that's one good issue one good thing we can bring to the table is, you know, that we've got expertise, and so Martin, for example, chairs the CITFA in the Midlands contract audit group, and he's got a good background in contract and procurement work. So Martin brings that to the table as well, although he will be from 1st of June looking after EMCCA. EMCCA's going to be the audit manager for EMCCA, so Martin will be the person coming onto these meetings to talk to you and bring you up to speed on what we're doing audit-wise. But it is a challenge at the moment, in that it's not the typical audit work we're used to. We can't just go in there and test procedures and all that type of stuff. Let's have a sample of this, that and the other and test that, because it doesn't always exist. But what we can look at is how things are working, how they're evolving, and that's the key to us going forward. So that really covers where we are with the progress report. I move on then to the main thing, being the internal audit plan for next year and how we put that together, which is again not in our usual way of doing things. But also then need to mention as well the change in internal audit standards that comes in from the 1st of April. So that's something else that the committee will need to be aware of. If you're on audit committees at your constituent authorities, you may well have been briefed on this anyway. But the audit plan, we had an idea. What we normally do is we would pick up the risk register, look at the risk register, but of course that again is in its formative stage, and we debated that this morning. The other thing we do is what we call the look at the audit needs assessment and assess the audit universe. The audit universe for EMCCA is growing. It's not a static thing like at most authorities. You can these are the areas that you'll need to do. EMCCA's is considerably and over the next few years, the amount of audit that's required will go up and up. The key thing for us was, so what are other combined authorities doing? So we looked at others, so certainly the West Yorkshire one we looked at, Greater Manchester, just to see what sort of areas they're looking at. We put together a long list of areas, that we thought would be there for consultancy / assurance. Sent that through to Nick. Nick went through it all with a fine-tooth comb, I think it was, and prioritised everything. So the audit plan you've got in front of you in this report is what Nick felt were the priority ones for 25-26. However, we had to tailor that to the amount of audit that EMCCA want for 25-26. So a few of the ones have been slightly dropped out, but they're on the reserve list and they can be brought on at any stage. I mean, the key thing from my point of view as a head of audit looking at all this is, how a risk's going to change over 25-26, and that's something we can't forecast. And as you know, Chair, trying to put together an audit plan, an annual audit plan, when things can change like that. I mean, the COVID pandemic showed us all how risks can change very, very dramatically. One of the things that we do for one of our partners, which is a well-known city council in the East Midlands, is we do quarterly audit planning. So we take a quarterly audit plan to the audit committee there, which has got a lot of indicative audits as well in there, which we're looking at, say, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4. But what it means is we're not going back and saying, we've got to change this in the plan, we've got to change that in the plan. So each time, it's a new plan coming forward. Yes, audits are still going on, and audits will run concurrently. So there's not like, we haven't got or we're cutting off at the end of the financial year. We keep the audits running because, again, it's a continuous audit, really. I think, and I know the feedback from the committee, is that they like the idea of quarterly planning, and that's something that Martin will address with the necessary people and the audit committee itself as time moves on. At the moment, we're not really in a position, are we, Martin, to do quarterly planning?
It's a smaller plan at the moment. Once it starts to grow and it gets more resources into it, then yes, we can obviously look at that. At the moment, there'd only be sort of 2 or 3 audits devised for every quarter. So it makes sense at the moment for it to be annual, because there's no point in doing a big quarterly rolling plan if you're only getting 2 or 3 audits each time. Once the numbers are there and you sort of 5, 6, half a dozen, it makes a lot more sense.
But things will change. So we may come back to you in June and say, well, this has come upon our radar, so this is something that we need to have a look at. But again, we'll be using the risk register going forward, and the idea is we liaise with the relevant people so we can see what changes are happening to the risk register. One of the things we do, certainly at some of the partners where they've got a horizon scanning and that type of stuff, is we look at what sort of risks are coming up on there, and then is that in the risk register? If it is, okay. If not, why is it not in the risk register? What will they do if it manifests itself? And clearly picking from the risk register the areas we want to look at and saying, well, these are the controls that they say are in place. Are these actually working? So we'll have more to go on as the risk register forms itself, and we've got the controls being detailed in there to how those risks are going to be mitigated, and then we can look at those. So that's really the sort of background to the plan and how we've put it together. What we've put in front of you is what myself and Nick have thought, these could be the key areas. They may well change. And so I would say, we've got to be flexible this year about it. But the key thing there is to just make sure as an audit committee you feel that we are looking at the right things and providing consultancy on the right things, because again, if things aren't in place, we can't actually audit them. But what we will be doing, for example, is working with the accountants, etc., when they bring in their own financial management system. So there's nothing worse for being an auditor and coming in after something's happened and saying, did you look at this and this? And they go, well, where were you when we were looking at all this? So what we want to try and do is work with EMCCA throughout. So as they're bringing in new systems, we're working with them to make sure that the right controls are in there, things are happening as they should do. And then we can give that assurance back to the Audit and Governance Committee. The only other thing I wanted to talk about is the impact of the global internal audit standards that came in the private sector and everywhere else on the 1st of January, but the public sector not until the 1st of April, because the public sector is different. We have different ways of doing things. One of the things we have got to do, and we've got the audit charter here for you, which tells you how we do our audits. That's changed, and one of the key things is that we now have to put into the audit charter the internal audit mandate. Now, for local government, the internal audit mandate comes from the Accounts and Audit Regulations, and for local government, from the Local Government Act 1972. So there'll be those type of things we have to take. That's our mandate for auditing in local government. But of course, it's different in the private sector, and the global internal audit standard has been set by the Institute of Internal Auditors, who are based in America. So everything is more around private sector type of stuff. So in the public sector, we have to rely on the internal audit standard setters, of which the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy is one of those bodies, and they guide us as to how things should happen in the public sector. So what they've also done to come in with the new global standards is something called the application note, which this is how you deal with it for the public sector. So one of the things we've got to take onto account is the application note for the global internal audit standards in the UK public sector. Hidden in the global standards is something called Domain 3, which looks at the governance of internal audit. And that again is something that CIPFA have produced a code of governance on, and that's something that we need to talk for all the partners that we audit around how they govern internal audit. So it's one for the senior leadership teams, the management team at all of our partners, and also their audit and audit committees. The audit committees need to understand, this is what's our role with internal audit. So again, that's something that Martin will be talking to you about in the coming months. The one thing that CIPFA said is that we don't have to be conformed.
Richard, do you want sort of speaking up a bit? It sounds like we've got somebody revving the engine outside.
People say it's no problem for me to speak. That one of the problems I do have is I am a bit loud. Not quite as loud as Martin can be, but on occasions. But so one of the things that we do need to address is the conformance. And CIPFA have said, you're not expected to conform from day one. What you've got to do is you've got to build that conformance up over a period of time, but have a plan in place to do that. So that's one of the things we're working on at the moment, is a plan which looking at it's a gap analysis between where we are as CMAP, with where we were under the public sector internal audit standards, which we were reviewed back in 2022. Yes, 2022, and we were seen as to conform with the public sector internal audit standards, and we were even put as, to use a Crufts term, best in show at that particular point in time. So we always
I think it was the best he'd ever reviewed, not best in show.
He did call it best in show at one occasion, but he did say it a bit like Crufts. But yeah, so we were right up there in the very top quartile. So things will have changed with the new standards coming in. We will have to make some changes to that, but again, we'll keep the committee informed. to what's happening as we go along. And the charter, what we're using at the moment is the charter we had last year, but the new charter I've virtually finished writing. I've just got couple more paragraphs to do, but that will be coming out to all the partner audit and governance committees in due course. I would hope it would be coming to the June meeting. That's all I really wanted to say around the sort of background to this and how we've come up with the plan. And if anyone's got any questions, happy to answer.
Thank you, Richard. I know we say June meeting, it's actually July meeting, I think. So, Nick, do you want to add anything to it before I ask?
No, I think the earlier thing I'd just like to say is obviously thanking Richard for working, but also mentioning that that when he put forward the proposal for the internal audit plan, it wasn't just me who said they looked good. I did share them with the senior leadership team as well in EMCCA, and we agreed. They all agreed they look good. So it's slightly wider than just me saying it.
Councillor State.
That maybe relates to my first question, which was about who makes the decisions and choices about what goes as a priority in the work plan, and I would have assumed that was up to the auditors rather than the chief finance officer. I think you partly answered by that by implying that as things move along you will be shifting more to looking at the risk register, but it just struck me that that was my feeling.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we have to be independent.
Yes.
What we want to do is make sure that what we're covering adds value, and to get that, going via Nick and the senior leadership team gives us that. They're saying these are the type of things we'd like to see in there. Ultimately, the decision is down to me currently, but down to Martin as to what we look at, and we'll advise you as a committee as to these, and this is why we want to look at that. What you need to make sure as a committee is that no one's blocking what we're doing. That we're able to go in there, do our audits. I mean, it's not easy, and the world of audit is not as straightforward as it used to be. It takes a lot of time now to get audits done, and this is one of my concerns. And this is across the partnership. I've heard it from other heads of audit and other partnerships and other authorities as well through our networking. It's becoming increasingly more difficult because of the priorities on the staff, etc. To all the auditees, I hate the word auditees, but it seems to be the best one. But they're trying to do their own day job. They've got audit looking at them, and it takes a lot longer now for them to. We're finding that we're getting knocked back quite a bit, and so the audit committees we go to, we're going to them and saying, look, we're not going to be able to progress this. These recommendations aren't moving forward. So again, it's the support of the audit committee going forward that we require. Certainly, as we're evolving into getting recommendations and stuff. So what you should be looking for is, EMCCA, these are the things that internal audit are putting forward. EMCCA actioning those. How quickly are they actioning them? And that's going to be the key request that I would put to the Audit and Governance Committee at EMCCA is, this is where we need your support on things.
We will probably be having at least one meeting a year where we'll meet without the officers, with just the external auditors and internal auditors. Maybe sort of at the start of one of the meetings.
With the external auditors?
The colleagues next to you.
Sorry, did you mean with the external auditors?
Yeah, external auditors and internal auditors, but without the officers of EMCCA present. So, we'll probably tag it along to one of the meetings, maybe just at the start of a meeting, a short session, so in case there's anything that we want to raise with them, or if they want to raise with us without officers present. Councillor Payne.
And just to pick up on a couple of your points, so in the internal audit progress report, I think it'd be useful to see what the target end date is for the audit, whether it's in a quarter, because if it's then run behind, the reason it's run behind is because staff are finding it difficult to engage. We'll be able to see that. I understand you're early into this process, so it's just for the future I'm expecting to see, there it is, and this one's off target. It'd be good to see how many audits, what the volume was. I know that's not an exact science, because sometimes an audit is a very small thing and sometimes it's a very big thing. And then also a table that says what the assurance ratings mean. I mean, there are none at the moment, so it doesn't really matter, but I'm assuming at some point they will exist, and we'll just need to be able to see what they are.
We do have a standard internal audit report, progress report. We've got a new audit management system that we've brought in called K10, and that is going to hopefully at some point, we've still got a few teething problems with it. It currently generates the assignment report for us, but it should also then generate the progress report. At the moment we're having to do them by hand, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
But
So it'll come.
If you look at our progress reports too, I mean, we've got members around this table that receive these through, because we've got people from the partner organisations here, and they'll be able to tell you that what you'll get is you'll get a full progress report which lists the whole of the audit plan and where we're at on each one of them. So it'll say, I mean, for example, in this progress report here, you've got all the audits we were planning on doing, and then how far we've progressed, like in progress, started, allocated, that type of stuff. Then we break it down. These are the reports that we've issued since the last audit committee, and that will be broken down then into what recommendations, where the weaknesses were, what recommendations we've made, etc. So that will give you an idea around that, and then there'll be quite a bit around the outcomes of things, recommendations, and how we're progressing those, and a whole, depending on your organisation, a whole feast of outstanding recommendations for audit committee to get the teeth into.
And then last question, this is a bit of a weird one. You might say it's a bit pedantic, but in effect you are a contractor.
Yes.
So who audits the procurement process for appointing you to do this?
This has been raised before. Again, it's it's down to, I mean, basically what's happened is EMCCA have applied to join the partnership. So, they again go to the CMAP board and there, but I'm not sure it's something. I'm looking at my colleague in external. It's not something external audit would necessarily look at.
No, because you can check it yourself.
But external audit wouldn't. But I'll ask my procurement expert here.
We're a local government partnership, so there's an exemption with respect to engagement, because you can engage with the local authorities in business and works without having to go through an open procurement route. So we fall down that category, which was the same under the Public Contract Regulations 15, and it falls into the same under the new 23 Procurement Act.
And if I may, we've followed the scheme officer's delegation in relation to that as well. So under the Constitution, the scheme officer's delegation gives me as Section 73 officer the ability to enter into that partnership. And consulted as well with other people.
I'm only asking because High Peak does it internally at the moment to an extent, and then anyway.
I think as a committee we also have a role in terms of monitoring the effectiveness of internal audit. Councillor State, Councillor McKee.
I think were you first? I was just, could you briefly just explain the partnership element? In other words, what does the partnership do that the internal auditor or the internal audit department in EMCCA doesn't do?
Effectively, the partnership is the internal audit section for EMCCA. So basically what you'll have is CMAP will provide you with an audit manager in Martin. So Martin will act as the audit manager for EMCCA, and they go through all the audits. Martin will report to the committee. He'll do the annual audit opinion, which is the key document. This is why we do internal audit, which will give you then the various assurances. He'll give an overall assurance based on the assurance he's got from all the individual pieces of audit work.
Who is Martin's boss?
That's me.
I'm interested because at North East Derbyshire, we've got a manager of internal audit. We're a member of, I want to say North East Derbyshire, that's the partnership.
Yeah.
But our audit manager is accountable to the Chief Finance Officer. That's why I was raising the question. That's very interesting.
So within the partnership, Martin reports to me. There is still a dotted line through to the relevant people at EMCCA.
But it's a dotted line.
It's a dotted line.
That's for independence.
That's for
If I reported directly to the Section 73 officer, then obviously I wouldn't be independent from the organisation in order to obviously raise issues and concerns that I had.
Yeah. And just to be clear as well, that if there were any particular issues to be raised, Martin, Richard or anybody else from CMAP would have unfettered access to the CEO, obviously to this committee, to the chair, etc. through there. So actually it's ensuring that independence is in place, which I think is important under internal.
That's why I'm raising it, yes. Yes, thank you.
Councillor McKee.
Well, thanks, Chair. Yeah, to be fair, that was the point that I was about to very firmly make, that the Central Midlands Audit Partnership solves a lot of problems in the procurement structure, and independence is one of the biggest ones. Circumnavigating the procurement structure, while it would appear to be I understand why you're asking, it would appear to be a conflict of interest perhaps, if you like. In this case, it's the only way it can work, because of the way it's structured and because of the independence. Otherwise you'd be tendering forever and then stuck in tender because you can't conclude the tender. I also wanted to just give you some assurance, this is a teaser, and the reports that you get are much more comprehensive and quite self-explanatory in terms of the rating scale. So working with CMAP from Derby City's perspective, I can't strongly enough endorse working with them going forward. If that gives you some assurance, I don't know, but hopefully it does. That's the intent.
Okay, Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, a couple of things have made me laugh, I'm afraid. One is that all these new standards that keep coming along on audit, and then the reality of what's actually happening to audit in the local government sector, where basically they haven't had like loads of years off in a very quick manner, aren't they, just to try and catch up with the backlog that's been created. And then I got distracted by K10. Because, you know, you immediately think that K9, what's Doctor Who's dog? I've just checked and they're from Chicago, they're not Doctor Who fans, so they can't be that connection. But just to tease you on this one a little bit, I had our head of social services telling us just what a brilliant impact AI was going to have on their ability to process all the data that they have in social care and social services. And I just wondered, is there any sign yet that AI is going to make audit quicker? And then actually the actual question is, are you basically on time for this year's work?
To answer your questions, I mean, one of the things we will explore is AI anyway. I mean, the Central Midlands Audit Partnership is hosted by Derby City Council, and Derby City Council is doing quite a lot of work around AI at the moment. I've sat on the compliance board there just to see how things are going. We do a lot of data analytics anyway. Martin certainly has led on quite a few of our, certainly around procurement, isn't it, and that type of stuff. We've done a lot of data analytics, so we can look at data through that way. So we've got auditors that are trained around data analytics. To pick up your point around the plan would be done, as I said earlier, what I'd rather do is keep some of these rolling because they're consultancy. So we will have to we will still produce an audit opinion on the year of what we've done, but there's still key elements. The elements we're looking at, the key ones, we're looking at governance, financial management, and risk management. So, you know, just to cut them off and then say that's what we're going to do on that one. Martin will be picking this up, so I don't really want to put words into Martin's mouth. But if I was in Martin's shoes going forward, the governance, risk, and financial management systems, the frameworks around that are key for his opinion going forward. So I would expect, that we will want to keep doing work around those areas. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I'd agree wholeheartedly. I would probably add that obviously we've got the annual plan here, but that's probably going to be quite fluid, and there are potentially likely to be plan changes throughout the year. As and when that should occur, they'll obviously be reported to this committee accordingly.
Well then, if I can put it more bluntly, given the significant issues that the local government sector has had with producing statements of accounts and audit opinions on time, are you on time for producing something for 24-25?
We will be producing an annual audit opinion at your July meeting on 24-25, yes.
You're on time?
Well, yeah, because we're doing all the assurance work as we go, so everything we're doing is feeding into my assurance opinion.
I had a couple of suggestions for the plan for 25-26. One of them was about
Before you go into that, I was going to ask a question about your partnership arrangement with Councillor Stutton. Will you be working with the Nottinghamshire side of the audit team to ensure that there's a fair balance of all the information you need where it crosses over?
Where we need to talk to other audit sections to get assurance on what they're doing. For example, as I was saying earlier about all the IT systems coming from Nottinghamshire County Council, I'll need to get this answers Councillor Edwards is saying, I need to get assurance from that to build into my opinion work. So yeah, when we need to talk to other audit sections, we do. I mean, one thing that auditors are very good at is networking. We talk to a lot of the other major partnerships. So, you know, we used to be part of something called Audit Together, which was looking at, you know, which put us into the same, we talked to the South West Audit Partnership, which is one of the biggest audit partnerships in the country. The Veritown they do the West Yorkshire Combined Authority as well. Some of the London partnerships. There's quite a lot of audit partnerships on the South Coast as well, so we talk to those as well, and that gives us best practice and all sorts of stuff around that. So we're always going to be talking to other internal audit services, and the thing is, we have, unfortunately I couldn't go to it this morning, but we have what's called the Local Authority Chief Auditors Network, which was this morning, so unfortunately I was coming here, but again, so it gives me contact there with all the other heads of audit, so we can talk, and I can say, you know, I need to find information on this, that and the other. So yeah, providing we're not going to fall foul of data protection, then it shouldn't be an issue.
Okay, thank you.
So I had a couple of suggestions for the 24-25 plan. One of them was that you had risk management in the reserve.
Yes.
Is that, could you bring that in for the plan maybe towards the end of the year? So so we can see how the risk management policies framework that we have are operating. Then you've got some data to look at, so how the risk registers are changing, how SLT, the management team, are sort of monitoring it. So that was one suggestion.
Just to add to that, there is an ongoing risk management audit at the moment which is providing consultancy on the review of those documents and everything. So okay. there is still one open at the moment, which is why it was put in the reserve list and not necessarily in the main audit plan. But yeah, that can certainly be taken on board.
Yeah, but you know, maybe towards the end of the year, so we can see how they're working. And the other suggestion I had was that couldn't we have maybe, say, I don't know, 15 or 20 days for as a contingency for this committee. So in case we haven't got anything in at the moment, but in case this committee decides that we want something that we want to look at that is not in the plan, or maybe that the committee might want to commission, it's not necessarily that we want to use those days, but at least we've got that availability if, as a committee, we decide we want some work to be undertaken.
Yeah, that can be added in, that's not a problem. What I will say is, should you want a piece of work introducing, just bring it to our attention. We can obviously look to substitute one of the other audits and do a plan change and swap it out, you know, so you won't miss out on that. And just because it's not a separate contingency, you've still got the ability to obviously engage that work.
Yeah, it'll be a committee decision once we if we have something, but that just allows us the freedom to ask for something.
Yeah.
If we need to. Any other observations, comments?
One final comment I've just read at the end. At the audit, it's going to cost around 103,000. Does that include the reserve audit list, or will that be additional cost to this EMCCA partnership?
This 103k is to deliver the amount of days that we agreed with EMCCA to do, so it'd be about 250. The reserves are not on that one, but what happens with the reserve audit list is if any areas we think that perhaps the risks fall on it, or you know, it's just not seen as an area we need to do, or we're having difficulty, or we were told, you know, there's too many changes going on, then we bring an item off the reserve list up and drop that other one down. Yeah. So the reserve list is there just to supplement anything else if we're having difficulty, you can't get an audit started, or we think you need to delay an audit.
Okay, happy with that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I think there's just one point which I forgot to mention about working with CMAP, and I'm making an assumption here, but a membership to CMAP means that we have a board member in CMAP.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
So a member of this committee will sit on CMAP's board, as well as the other measures in place to ensure appropriate conduct. We
also have an operational group, which it can either be the Section 73 officer or the monitoring officer can sit on, depending on. In the majority at the moment, we've got what's called Section 151 officer in local government. We've got one monitoring officer, and the rest are Section 151 officers, except for the Almo, where it's a finance director. So again, it's the choice of the EMCCA have the choice of who they put on to the operational group.
So is that something that the committee needs to vote on then? Who's going to represent the committee on CMAP board? Or because in Derby, I think it's just the chair is automatically.
The chair tends to be. but every organiser, every partner has their own way of doing stuff. For example, Ashfield have always put forward one of their cabinet members, whatever. I think most of them go with audit chairs where possible.
So I realise this. I've sort of sprung this on the committee. It's not in an agenda, so I don't think we can vote on it. Does it need to come back into a future meeting, perhaps?
Yes, perhaps if we can have an item for the next meeting, and then we can.
If I can say, there's no planned board meetings between now and the next meeting anyway. So plus, if you say they've got elections coming up, you might vote someone on that's.
But very short term.
Yes.
Richard, you mentioned the benefits of joining CMAP. Is there any downsides, or does that expose EMCCA to any risks or liabilities of joining CMAP?
I can't think of any downsides. I mean, I don't think. I mean, there's many positives. I mean, one of the things we have got is we've got what's called the CMAP reserve, and a few years ago all the partners got a share back from that. So that was a nice little learner for some of the authorities, but that was based on how long they'd been in the partnership. So as you can imagine, Derby City and South Derbyshire did quite well out of it. But it's also based on the percentage of of makeup. So it used to be 75% Derby, 25% South Derbyshire at the very beginning, but you can see how much it's dwindled. Derby's down to 37% now of the partnership. So with the other 8 make up that other 63%. So it's narrowing down. So, but I can't think of any downsides to it. I mean, I think anyway the benefits outweigh it. I mean, the independence one, as we said earlier, is the key one. But it's also the fact with the expertise we can bring as well, certainly through IT. And we've got, we are increasing in size. The partnership's increasing, so we're having to increase the staffing. So again, there's the resilience element that comes out of it as well, which you don't get if you've got your own internal audit team.
Thank you.
I'll try to stop. What is the potential impact of local government reorganisation on the partnership, or is it too early to map that?
If I break it down, it's quite so. EMCCA won't be affected by it. Derbyshire Fire Authority shouldn't be affected by it. So there's 2 partners. Our other partners are Derby City, South Derbyshire, Amber Valley, and we do provide audit services to Erewash as well. So we've got the whole of, although the Amber Valley bit, we're not quite sure where that's going to fit in, but we've certainly got the southern Derbyshire. Nottinghamshire is going to be the more interesting one because we've only got Ashfield there, so a lot's going to. And our other 3 are down in northern Warwickshire, so we've got North Warwickshire, Nuneaton, Bedworth, and Rugby, so they're forming the north of Warwickshire. And again, the talk at the moment with Warwickshire is it's going to be possibly a north and south split again. So, but what happens with reorganisation, we don't know. Will CMAP even exist? What will happen then is that the audit team will then have to probably be farmed out to the partner authorities as. So what happened when reorganisation took place in '97 was Derbyshire County Council, for example, and Nottinghamshire County Council would have sent a proportion of their auditors, infrastructure like IT equipment and all that type of stuff, usually the stuff that's a bit outdated and doesn't work too well, but to the city councils. So
it's on
I'm not looking at the chair because of course he was in the same position as me then. We were accepting. So you will. So I would imagine if CMAP does, if for example with reorganisation CMAP gets broken up, then the audit staff will go out to the various partners. So what will happen is perhaps EMCCA would end up saying with an audit manager coming out to them with a couple of audit staff, and it depends then how EMCCA wanted to do its audit after that, whether it wanted its own internal team. But if we can keep CMAP going, we will do.
But it's in the mix, it's a consideration for the constituent authorities.
Yeah, it's going to be one of my main jobs going forward as head of partnership, is to liaise with all the various bodies to see what happens. But for example, if the Southern Derbyshire one goes forward and is made, then CMAP provide the audit services for that, so you'd expect the CMAP to still be going, because they would become the auditors for the Southern Derbyshire Unitary, for example. I mean, again, it's all conjecture, but
It could remain as a partnership and just have reduced partners.
Yeah.
Each partner being a lot bigger.
Yeah.
And by law
Yeah.
require internal audit service anyway. We are required to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a statutory function, so.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a very useful meeting. Finally, before we end, can I just say thank you to Nick? It might be his last meeting of this audit committee. I've certainly found yourself, advice and your guidance and everything very valuable, and for steering us through this, the first year. So on behalf of the committee, can I sort of thank you for everything that you've done for us? And Richard, hopefully we'll still continue to see you as head of partnership in the future. So, thank you.
If you could just say thank you for those thanks, but also just to inform the committee there that Richard Williams starts as the new Exec Director for Resource and Section 73 Officer on the 7th of April, and he will be at your next meeting.
Thank you. My apologies, I missed out that we have the recommendations that I should have mentioned. We have 3 recommendations. First one was to note the progress against the internal audit plan. The second one was to approve the plan. And the third one was to note that we are joining the CMAP partnership. Are we all happy to approve recommendations? Yeah. Thank you, and apologies for that again. And then thank you all, and have a good afternoon.
Cheers.
Thank you.